All right, good evening. I'd like to call to order the study session for Lakewood City Council on May 2nd, 2022. For those joining tonight via telephone, that number is 720-707-2699. Webinar ID of 820-6281-3086. You'll press ##. And if you'd like to speak under one of the items, you'll go ahead and press *9 and then *6 to unmute. With that, will the clerk please call the roll?
Hall.
Here.
Abel.
Here.
Franks.
Here.
Jensen.
Here.
Mayat Guerrero.
Here.
Over.
Here.
Shaharazi.
Here.
I think I seen him. Springsteen.
Here.
Stewart.
Here.
Strom.
Here.
Vincent.
Here.
You have a quorum.
All right, fantastic. Well, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us this evening as we go through a couple of important items, both of which have been on Lakewood Speaks, and some comments regarding item number 3, our next presentation, which is Article 13 Sustainable Development Standards update. And there were a couple questions and folks had wondered. So the Planning Commission has also weighed in and given their advisory opinion as to certain things, and staff has also. So you should have all of that in your different packets as we move forward. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Hodson.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening. This evening, we're going to have a presentation from our Sustainability Manager, Jonathan Wachtel, and he'll introduce the rest of the staff who will help with the presentation. So Jonathan, take it away.
Great, thank you. Good evening, Mr. Wachtel.
Good evening. Thanks, Mayor. Thanks, Ms. Hodgson. Mayor and City Council, I'm Jonathan Wachtel. I'm the Sustainability Manager for the City of Lakewood. And I'm going to be joined in a few minutes, and I'm going to actually do a brief introduction here to provide some background. But then I'm going to pass the presentation over to Senior Sustainability Planner Caitlin Hasenbog-Long, who's going to go over the details of the proposed updates to Article 13. And we also have with us Jeff Wong, our Senior Sustainability Planner for Energy and Climate. And he's with us really just to help answer any questions as they might come up, if those are appropriate. So with that, I'm going to ask Ms. Long if she's in the meeting to go ahead and share the presentation so we don't have to switch back and forth. I think she can move me through my couple intro slides and then take it away from there. So. Great, I think we're in business there. All right, so tonight we are here to discuss the Article 13 update. Those is an article that was adopted a couple years ago to start as one piece of a journey we've been taking to implement sustainability standards into our codes here to advance our goals. And so I want to start by kind of laying some groundwork at a high level, and then we'll get into the details. We know that development is, you can go ahead and advance the slide, Caitlin, please. We know that development impacts, oh, sorry, I'm waiting for it. There we go. We know development impacts life in Lakewood. I don't need to tell you all of you that it's a constant topic. What we build, how we build it, what we choose to preserve and what we let get knocked down, the infrastructure improvements that we require, the densities, materials, colors, landscapings. We know all of this impacts and fundamentally shapes our community. Access to housing, topics we talk about all the time, neighborhood character and sense of place, access, how we access nature, how we move around town. I don't need to go through this whole list, but as you all know, these codes, building codes and land use codes really do shape our community, and balancing what are often seemingly competing needs is a fundamental challenge that any community faces. And especially when we consider the obligation to both respecting property rights while also protecting neighbors and the community from the unwelcomed impacts and spillage from new development. So this is an ongoing challenge that always is difficult. And when we add an additional layer of really wanting to meet our community's vision for sustainability, of meeting our needs today and protecting the quality of life, both currently and for future generations, that gets even more difficult, right, to weigh and balance all of these things. And on top of that, we face a climate crisis that we really need to acknowledge. It's here. The impacts are here. It's clear that we have to account for shifts and changes and things happening right here in Lakewood. And we've made commitments to do our part all the way back really to 2 comprehensive plans ago, but of course the most recent sustainability plan, acknowledging that we need to prepare for impacts and do our part to reduce our emissions and prepare and to reduce our community-wide emissions and do our part. And the good news is, while this is a big challenge, there's a pretty clear roadmap. We really know there's a lot we need to do, but we really know the fundamental things that we can do to really make an impact in reducing our community-wide emissions and meeting our commitments. And that's, accelerating our transition to renewable energy, investing in making our new and existing buildings efficient in terms of how they use energy and water, reducing the use of fossil fuels for our heating, minimizing our tailpipe emissions and our waste-related emissions, and doing all of those things while we also enhance our resiliency so that we can adapt to changing conditions. We can do that by investing in green infrastructure that can provide ecosystem services. Think tree canopy coverage that helps sequester carbon, cleans our air, keeps our neighborhood shaded, and reduces heat. That's just one example. So we know we have a blueprint. Getting it done is always a challenge, especially when retrofitting our existing built environment. But that's where new development comes in. It's an opportunity as we build new to make sure that we're doing it in a way that reflects our goals and our vision as a community. And since the adoption of the most recent comprehensive plan, which isn't that recent, and we're due for updating, but these are really good plans that have stood the test of time. And since the adoption of the comprehensive plan and the sustainability plan, council has regularly directed staff to develop thoughtful and practical policies, but policies that advance sustainable development in Lakewood so that our new development really does reflect our community's goals. So the proposed updates we're bringing forward tonight build upon those previous efforts. Those include updates to our building codes to increase energy efficiency, to require solar-ready rooftops, EV infrastructure and parking requirements, and many more. And of course, the first version of Article 13 that was adopted by City Council several years ago to ensure that development really incorporated not just renewable energy and efficiency measures, but also all those other intangibles that make sure that new development integrates appropriately into the fabric of our community. The multimodal connections, the public spaces, the better materials, those types of things. And so these proposed updates are really the next step, the next opportunity that we have. And they're pretty important in advancing our sustainable development. The proposal that we're bringing forward for your feedback and for your comments and your questions will increase cost to developers. There's no way around that. But that average cost, we've done a lot of assessments looking at existing examples of projects at various scales, comes out to an average around 2.5% for multifamily and commercial developments. But I think that as you look at these, and we've done a lot of assessments and we're happy to share them with you, the benefits of that increased upfront investment is incredibly far-reaching and almost always provides long-term payback for the occupants and the neighbors of new development. Lakewood residents, existing Lakewood residents that might move in there, and future Lakewood residents are really going to benefit from this, and all the neighboring properties. We took a look at our proposal that we've developed with a lot of input, and we did some assessments on what would this look like in terms of impact if we took, if council were to adopt this and we extended this out to 2030 with an assumption that, the development patterns of the past 5-7 years would continue. And by 2030, we would see more than 200 projects. And I'll just say these are conservative estimates, more than 200 projects that will have invested in the community through the enhanced development portion of our proposal, more than 200,000 metric tons of avoided greenhouse gas emissions. We'd be hitting our 65% construction and demolition waste diversion target. And that is a waste stream that makes up more than 50% of metro-wide waste that goes to landfills. It's a huge opportunity. We would be addressing at least 19 comprehensive goals and policies in the comprehensive plan, and more than 30 of the sustainability plan goals and objectives. It doesn't mean we'd meet all those targets, but elements included here would help advance so many of our adopted goals that reflect our community vision. And most importantly, as I mentioned, a lot of benefit to the future tenants. Utility savings on the, if a quarter of these projects invest in renewable energy or significant energy efficiency measures, by 2030, the occupants of those buildings can have saved close to $20 million in utility bills. So we're talking about the ability to have a huge impact. Yes, there's a cost, but we've developed them with a lens to assess how it might impact affordability. And they've been developed with the help of community members, topical experts. We've reached out to the development community. A lot of this was driven by recommendations from the Lakewood Advisory Commission, with city staff, Lakewood's Planning Commission, of course, and they've all really been designed to be holistic and integrated across the city's buildings and zoning codes, to be flexible and malleable to site opportunities. And I think that's a really key element of what we've designed here, is that it's hard to create one size fits all rules across your entire community. And this proposal is really designed to acknowledge site opportunities and constraints, to incentivize rather than to penalize, and to reward innovation, affordability, and equity. And so with that, I'll stop talking. I'll turn it over to Caitlin Hasenbog-Long, our Senior Sustainability Planner, to walk you through the details. And I'll stick around for questions. Thank you so much for having us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. So I'll go ahead with part 2 of our presentation and agenda for tonight. As Mr. Wachtel said, I'm Caitlin Long, Senior Sustainability Planner. I'm going to cover an overview of the proposed amendments along with our analysis of the costs and benefits associated with them. We will also discuss the Planning Commission recommendations that came out of their January 5th public hearing, on which we need some direction and guidance from council. We don't have an answer there. And then we hope to wrap up with the discussion of any other questions that the council might have about the proposed amendments, so that we're in a good position to hopefully move forward. So we have spent the last year collaborating with community members, technical experts, and internal staff to develop a proposed framework for a more robust and holistic sustainable development program in Lakewood that builds upon the existing standards that we have in place. The overall sustainable development program would be contained within Article 13 of the Lakewood zoning ordinance, which is currently just the existing enhanced development menu. The proposed amendments would expand Article 13 to include not only the enhanced development menu, but also a greenhouse gas mitigation program, supplemental standards for construction and demolition recycling, and it would also reserve space for a future benchmarking and performance standard for existing building. The enhanced development menu is a point-based menu. It's designed to be flexible and context-specific, allowing for a wide variety of items to be implemented within a development site that holistically promotes city goals. Some examples of these types of items range from energy efficiency and renewable energy to local food access and public art. The greenhouse gas mitigation program has been designed to complement the enhanced development menu and specifically capture the impact that all development has on air quality and emissions. Those types of impacts can't be seen and they don't stay within the confines of a single property, but mitigation of them is still essential for the community to meet its climate goals and commitments and be the place that we all envision it to be. The construction and demolition waste recycling supplemental standards have been developed to help contractors figure out the logistics and knowledge of C&D recycling to further compliance with those existing waste diversion requirements that are adopted in the building code. And then down the road, the future potential benchmarking program would provide a way to compare buildings within the city, increase efficiency, and ensure long-term compliance with the city's climate commitments. This part of the sustainable development framework is envisioned within 3 to 5 years following implementation of the statewide benchmarking legislation, which passed last year. So next we'll dive into some specific details about each of these sections that are part of these currently proposed amendments. We'll start with the enhanced development menu, the existing section of Article 13. The enhanced development menu is intended to ensure the community as a whole realizes the benefits of new development, and it supports the community goals that have been identified in the comprehensive and sustainability plans. The existing EDM, as we call it, has a menu of options, and it currently applies to projects that are over 20,000 square feet in size. Those that are over 20,000 square feet and up to 50,000 square feet must earn 35 points from the menu, and those over 50,000 square feet must earn 50 points. It's designed to be flexible, voluntary, and holistic, and to ensure that new development is a positive investment in the community. Since this is in the zoning code, it is part of the major site plan review process, which occurs pretty early in the design. It's part of the site entitlements. That's all before building permits are submitted for review. So it is a place where we are able to have some good influence in how the overall development shakes out. When the enhanced development menu was adopted, staff made a commitment to continually monitor and report on its progress. In the first 2 years of implementation, we've had the opportunity to work with over 50 projects in various stages of the planning review process to determine the best ways for them to earn the required points. We found that we're getting many real benefits from some of these items, like recycling and compost service for multifamily developments. Some of the challenges that we've seen include the fairness of the point structure and the market availability of certain items like car share. And so with the feedback that we've gotten, we developed the proposed options that we're looking at changing. The proposed version of the enhanced development menu would have a total of 28 menu items, including the existing open option. So that's an increase of 8 total new items. And those would support efforts in the clean energy transition, water conservation, biodiversity, waste reduction, transportation, and community health and well-being, generally aligned with the chapters of the sustainability plan. We want to highlight a few of these items because they're new and relevant to development trends. So those are listed here: water quality, pollinator-friendly landscaping, enhanced streetscapes, and as well as introducing a new fee in lieu option for points required over 50. The point structure we're also looking at adjusting so that it does scale according to the size of the development. So 1 point per 1,000 square feet with a minimum of 10 points. And that way we're able to more evenly distribute the burden that developers would have to bear. As you can see, these are a lot of interdisciplinary benefits. It's not just about green buildings, it's about stormwater, native ecosystems, historic preservation, urban design, and the flexibility for the developer to choose what features make the most sense to them, including simply paying a fee in lieu for a portion of points. The applicability for the proposed version of the enhanced development menu would apply to all new development over 2,500 square feet, as well as major remodels and additions that are greater than 20% of the existing site and therefore trigger a major site plan review. There are exceptions for individual single-family homes and duplexes, although large subdivisions of single-family homes would apply to those. But an individual who wants to build a house, it does not count. There are also some exceptions for affordable housing units where the square footage that is affordable is not included in the square footage that needs to earn points, as well as for designated historic landmarks with an allowance for reduced points there as well. Next, we'll explore one of the new sections of Article 13, the Greenhouse Gas Mitigation Program. This is the section that evolved from the recommendation to pursue a renewable energy mitigation type of program from the LAC to City Council in February of 2021. This is, again, we know that more development and more people lead to the sources of our emissions through building energy, vehicle miles traveled, and waste generated. And so the idea with this particular part of the program is to make sure that the new emissions or the emissions of new development reflects where we want to be, not where we are right now. So that is basically the goal of this particular part of the program. The proposed greenhouse gas mitigation program evolved from that request for staff to further explore sustainable building programs. The program, as designed, would establish a performance standard or a maximum amount of annual emissions that new developments can emit based on their non-residential square footage or the number of residential units. And we have a way that we can help developers calculate the projected emissions of their given development and offer strategies for them to reduce their emissions in order to meet the performance standard. This program would apply to all new construction as well as significant remodels and additions that require a major site plan. It does apply to the new construction of single-family homes, but would not for remodels or additions, including ADUs, only the construction of a primary house. How do we determine the performance standard? This is representing where we need to be in 2030 in order to do our part in mitigating the most severe impacts of climate change and meet the city's climate commitments. Breaking out the residential and non-residential emissions, we calculate the goal emissions per person for residential emissions and per square foot for non-residential emissions. And this tells us what everyone needs to do in order to make their contribution in emissions mitigation. We have a long way to go, but one good step in the right direction would be for all new development to be built already meeting or exceeding those 2030 goals. We can use the per person and per square foot emissions goals to calculate the annual maximum emissions for proposed new development, and that is the greenhouse gas performance standard. Once we determine the performance standard for a proposed development that aligns with the city's goals based on either the square footage for non-residential development or the number of anticipated residents for residential development, then we can calculate the projected emissions of that development using the best available data for that type of land use and see if there is a gap between the projected emissions and the performance standard. If a development is designed efficiently to have projected emissions less than the performance standard, then the proposed development is already fully compliant and no additional work is needed in order to meet this particular part of the program. If the projected emissions do exceed the performance standard, then additional steps may need to be taken in order to comply. Using mitigation measures such as renewable energy, EV charging infrastructure, and waste diversion service contracts can reduce the overall projected emissions to a point that a project could meet the performance standard. As a bonus, several of those items in the enhanced development menu can reduce emissions, allowing developers to leverage benefits from both sections of the code. If a proposed development chooses not to mitigate all of their excess emissions, any emissions still exceeding the performance standard after mitigation measures would be subject to a fee in lieu of compliance. The fees collected would be used for projects that contribute to meeting the citywide emission reduction goals, such as energy efficiency retrofits for existing buildings. This last section is a little different in that it doesn't change the standards for what developers and contractors must do during construction. It just requires some extra planning and reporting before a project begins to ensure that it is successful in meeting those goals. Again, this is the third and final part of the proposed amendments for Article 13 that we are looking at this time. The materials that are already required to be recycled include concrete, asphalt, metal, untreated wood, cardboard, interior fixtures, and salvageable materials. The purpose of these supplemental standards is to allow staff a better mechanism to support implementation. We found that the main barrier to being successful at diverting construction and demolition waste is the lack of logistics and knowledge, not the cost. And it sometimes, especially for private developers, it may actually be more cost effective in the long term to fully recycle a building than it is to demolish it, for example. And so these supplemental regulations would just give us an opportunity to engage more with contractors. The recycling requirements in the building code currently applies to all new construction over 2,500 square feet and all demolition, and that is not proposed to change as part of any of this. The supplemental standards that would be contained in Article 13 would initially only apply to development projects that also require the enhanced development menu, which is more focused on multifamily and non-residential development. But it would be anticipated to eventually expand to any project that requires C&D recycling. The supplemental standards consist of 3 parts: a construction waste management plan to identify potential waste materials, designate an on-site waste manager, and identify training practices for employees and subcontractors. At the end of the project, a compliance report would be submitted that documents all of the landfill and recycling receipts and material weights. And finally, there would be a deposit paid prior to the permits being issued that is refunded upon compliance at the end of the project. And staff assistance would be provided throughout to help get all of these logistics in place and figured out before a project begins so that it increases their chances of success. The fees in lieu of compliance that I've mentioned a few times would be collected into what we're calling a climate protection and sustainability program. As aligned with legal requirements for fee in lieu expenditures, any revenues from these optional fees in lieus and forfeited deposits would fund a climate protection and sustainability program that would help advance sustainability of the built environment, climate mitigation and adaptation, as well as waste reduction projects. Some examples may include energy and water efficiency retrofits for existing buildings, renewable energy and electrification assistance, tree planting and preservation to support clean air and reduce urban heat impacts. First and foremost, the fees in lieu are options if the developer decides not to design their project to meet the standards. But based on the last 5 years of development data, and assuming between 25% and 75% compliance, the estimated annual revenue of a program like this could range between $750,000 and $2.2 million, again, depending on how many developments comply through the design and mitigation or through the fees in lieu. We know these are a lot of expanded requirements, and we want to understand the realities of implementation. Since the purpose of these standards is to maximize community benefits with minimal impact, let's discuss what those potential investments would be over the next 10 years of implementation. Developer costs are obviously one of the key things that we looked at. We ran numerous scenarios based on actual past permit data to assess these potential costs. For multifamily and non-residential scenarios, the added features in the enhanced development menu and the greenhouse gas mitigation program ranged from 0.4% to 6.8% of the total construction valuation. And the average was around 2.5 to 3%. For single family construction, the added features were approximately 2% of the total construction costs. Developers or builders may choose to make a larger upfront investment in renewable energy systems, such as solar panels, which in our analyses had between an 8 and 12-year return on investment and ongoing utility cost savings for the remainder of the life of the system, often another 10 to 15 years. The renewable energy systems may also be eligible for tax benefits and result in higher property values. And then finally, it also provides an opportunity for some of the larger developments that are over 50,000 square feet to already be prepared for the future state performance standards that we know are coming since that legislation passed in 2021. And so it's much cheaper to design a building up front to be able to meet those future standards than it is to retrofit it down the line. So this is an opportunity to be prepared for what we know is coming. We also want to discuss the equity and affordability considerations. In affordable housing, we made sure to try to incentivize more mixed income development by exempting any affordable units from having to earn points in the enhanced development menu. There are points that could be awarded for a housing design that's inclusive of all ages and ability levels in their interior spaces. And resource efficient buildings result in lower monthly utility bills for residential and business tenants. So there's a long-term savings opportunity there for occupants. Finally, there's an opportunity through the Climate Protection and Sustainability Program to allocate funds to programs that specifically support historically underserved and marginalized communities. To visualize the potential impact in the community, we mapped the last 5 years of approved site plan cases, which are shown here in red throughout the city. We then looked at the number of properties that are directly adjacent to those development sites, which would experience the most immediate impacts. And finally looked at properties within 1/4 mile of the development sites, which is walking distance of some of those community amenities that could be included in those development projects as part of the enhanced development menu. And you can see this is only 5 years worth of projects, and it covers a pretty significant area of the city where there's properties within 1/4 mile of new development. Extrapolating over the next 10 years of implementation, new development will account for nearly 12% of the total citywide building square footage. And over 35,000 properties in Lakewood would be located within, a 1/4 mile of a new development site. So again, there's that opportunity to benefit from the community amenities that are being provided at these sites, such as enhanced streetscapes, bike fix-it stations, public art, wildlife habitat, and more. The cumulative emissions avoided would be between around 200,000 and 250,000 metric tons of carbon, which is worth approximately $15 million in avoided costs to the infrastructure, economy, and public health. Beyond just the standards themselves, we also need to discuss the resources required to successfully implement the updated standards. The number of developments required to meet the standards under Article 13 would increase, and accordingly, so would the staff time required to review those projects, to monitor and track the progress of the program, consider future updates, and administer the Climate Protection and Sustainability Program projects. In preparation for these standards to potentially go into effect, staff has begun updating the existing applicant resource guide for the enhanced development menu and developing a new guide for the greenhouse gas mitigation program, which will more thoroughly explain all of the requirements, how to comply with them, and what documentation is needed to demonstrate they are in fact complying. In addition, the review process for waste management plans will provide contractors and staff an opportunity to work together through the logistics of changing hauling strategies to prioritize recycling more debris instead of sending it to landfills. So at the Planning Commission hearing on January 5th, they did recommend approval of these amendments with 2 recommended changes, and a complete discussion of those recommendations and staff responses was included in the meeting packet, but we do want to discuss them here as well. To summarize those recommendations, the Planning Commission voted to remove the maximum point cap in the enhanced development menu and to increase the greenhouse gas fee in lieu from representing 5 years worth of emissions to 15 years worth of emissions. These changes were intended to ensure fairness and equity among different development sizes so that the largest developments are proportionally doing as much as smaller developments and to capture more of a building's long-term emissions impact. Staff ultimately agrees with the intention of those changes and worked extensively with legal staff to determine feasibility. Based on the number of points that are available in the enhanced development menu and to preserve the flexibility of choice for developers, staff recommends increasing the maximum number of points to 150 rather than removing the cap altogether. This prevents the zoning code from mandating certain building construction standards, which would be more appropriate in the city's building codes, and would also prevent the fee in lieu from becoming mandatory. For the second recommendation, although we did figure out a way to calculate projected emissions over a 15-year period, taking into account the anticipated changes in the electrical grid mix, it relies heavily on many assumptions and plans that are not yet approved and are out of the city's control. These are plans by the Public Utilities Commission, and Xcel Energy. And so keeping the fee in lieu to represent a shorter term period allows us to use much more accurate data, which is the most fair thing to do for our developers. And then considering that the future benchmarking program where buildings would report their annual emissions and make adjustments to maintain their efficiency, that would be the most appropriate tool to monitor long-term building performance. And various types of benchmarking programs are in effect all over the country, as well as several examples here in Colorado between Denver and Fort Collins, and now the state of Colorado as well has recently adopted this. As we've discussed before, this type of program is being researched by staff, and we anticipate bringing forward separate amendments for such a program in the next 3 to 5 years. So I want to just bring back the overall framework. Hopefully we have an understanding of how these different pieces all work together. There's some built-in flexibility here that takes the new potential programs into account in the future. And where there's gaps due to noncompliance, we can use the fees in lieu that are paid to close the gaps and advance the overall city's goal. So we have the program that's designed to work together for a lot of benefit for relatively low cost and really incentivizes good development. The good development that we talk about is reflective of the community's established vision for the future. It minimizes impacts and maximizes benefits with an appropriate investment into the community and complements rather than competes with other city goals. Thank you for your time this evening. We are really looking forward to discussion and getting some feedback. As this is a study session, really the intention here is to get information from you, clarify what we can, and try to get things ready to hopefully present at a future public hearing to adopt these. So thank you.
All right, Ms. Hassenberg, Long, thank you so much. Well done. And I appreciate the whole team. So we'll start to go into some questions from the group, and also again want to get to some sort of consensus, especially on the two questions at hand moving forward. So with that, I'll start with Ms. Shahrazai.
Thanks, Mayor. Thanks so much for this presentation. Really excited to see this move forward. This was something we talked about at length at the planning retreat. So excited to see this tonight. Couple of questions. One, I'm sure Mr. Wachtel could probably guess, but I'm interested about a supply chain around the construction and demolition recycling. So I wasn't super clear. I'm assuming from how this is written that we would be working with outside recyclers, but wondering if there is an opportunity for us to consider as a municipality building out an infrastructure that would allow us to retain some revenue from this. And I'll use a porcelain recycling example. So there is porcelain recycling that happens out of Colorado Springs, and they crush it to fine grain and use that as a road base. So is there an opportunity for us to look at something similar to that? So that's one question. And then I wanted to better understand the fees in lieu. Do we have a plan for how that money goes back out into the community? So I understand it's meant to offset intentions around other, actions we're taking to be more sustainable, but have we built that process yet to sort of determine what comes next? So I'll pause there. I have more questions, but I know sort of some of my colleagues, so.
Sure, I appreciate that. Let me just write that down real quick. So as far as the C&D goes, I think we're not anticipating at this point in time doing any sort of direct part of the supply chain with that. It would be mostly us having the ability to facilitate between contractors who are doing the construction and demolition and getting them connected with the appropriate recyclers who are able to then divert their waste from landfills, and making sure that they have the appropriate setup on site, that they have training plans for their employees, and so that they can get their receipts and everything recorded for us so that we can actually get a diversion rate for their project. We are aware of some companies that are doing some pretty innovative things with C&D debris, C&D waste. And I think it's a really interesting pilot project, and something along those lines could absolutely be part of what the fee in lieu funds could get used for. Some of the forfeited deposits from the waste program. It's intended to support further waste diversion goals, and particularly with C&D, since it represents such a large part of our waste stream, it's a really good opportunity there as well. So I think that there's opportunities to make really good use of that. It's not envisioned in how the program is currently written to use it for city purposes at this point.
Got it. Thank you.
And
Yeah.
then the
Oh,
kind
yeah,
of
sorry.
answers. Sorry, go ahead, Mayor Paul.
Nope, you're good. I wasn't sure if you were going into the second one. Go ahead.
I was. So that kind of touches on the programming ability as well. We do have some ideas of what the funds could potentially be used for. We did a scan through the sustainability plan to identify targets and indicators that would be that are related to built environment goals and to these types of programs, specifically in the built environment design, in climate adaptation, and then in waste diversion. And so we identified several projects out of the plan that are things that we'd like to be able to contribute more to with the appropriate funding. And so that's where we were looking at for some of these. The process that this would all need to be that I'll need to go through is the typical budgeting process. This would be established as some sort of fund, and then we would need to allocate those funds for projects on an annual basis through the typical budget process. And then we could report back on what the actual impact was that we had, whether that's in terms of the pounds diverted or the mitigation that we were able to do. Does that answer your question?
I think so. So to be clear, this would help to offset already budgeted things, or the potential for us to think globally about things that we maybe don't see in our budget?
I think more globally. It looks like Mr. Wachtel has his hand up though, so if you'd like to.
Please, Mr. Wachtel, please.
Oop, you're on mute.
Of course I am. That's probably good for everyone. Anyway, I think what's important is the process. And I think what would happen here is to follow rules and to be transparent is that proposed projects, first of all, the money would need to be used to mitigate the topic, the area in which we collected those funds. So we collected funds for construction, demolition, waste diversion, funds because people didn't meet the standard. We would use those funds for projects that worked on, addressed waste and same for greenhouse gas emissions. And we would bring the proposal on how those funds were to be spent through each budget process. It would be new funds that we didn't have, but it would go through the budget process ultimately with council approval each year. And I think, all the details of that are getting ironed out in terms of how that would get presented. But what's written into the proposed language is that, it's a fund that we can make sure we're following all the rules and using the funds for the correct category of projects, and making sure we're reporting back on exactly how those funds were used. So there's full transparency.
Good there? Okay. So I have Ms. Jansen, Mr. Abel, and Ms. Franks.
Thank you. So before you were talking about the standards coming down, and I just wondered, is that from the state or is it from the Fed or is it our own standards? Caitlin?
Sorry, I had to
That's
tell
okay.
myself to unmute again. So the state of Colorado passed a benchmarking law last year. They are currently in the first year of gathering all of that reporting data, and then they'll be developing a performance standard that they expect existing buildings to be able to meet going forward. That law only applies to buildings that are 50,000 square feet and greater at this point in time, although they did write it such that local jurisdictions have the ability to set a lower threshold. So it doesn't preclude us from trying to adopt something that is less than that if we so chose. Denver's in the process of, or Denver already has their Energize Denver program, but they're also working closely with the state on how to integrate those programs. And so we thought that it'd be most efficient and effective for us to wait and see how the state worked exactly, and then we could bring that here with something that's a bit more already developed and involved.
Was that a legal challenge, do you know, or do you?
I don't know the details of what it took to get that passed.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Abel.
There we go. There are a lot of interesting things here and a lot of solutions to problems we've been facing for a long time and haven't done anything about. We had a couple of comments that at first seemed to be a bit at odds. One that the system favors the large developer, and another that the system favors smaller developers. It looks to me like it's a mixed bag, because some points are just kind of basic. As if you meet LEED certification, there's 75% or 100% right there. However, some are scaled by size. If your square footage is huge, you pay half as much per square foot as someone. If you have a 300,000 square foot structure, you pay half as much per square foot as someone who has 150,000 square foot structure under that 150,000 square foot cap. And then some of these points count double. I mean, they have a double purpose, and you can, with the same effort, get twice the points. I don't mind that at all. I think that encourages a lot. So how can we handle that disparity between the small and large, between the basic and the scaled by size? Secondly, the Planning Commission recommended a 15-year period, and staff wants to cut that to 5. I'd like to comment on that process later. But it seems to me, if something comes up and we need to change it, we can change it. We have it within our power to adjust these figures. We could, if we make it 15 years tonight and we find out that 9 years is better, we can go there. Well, let's find out. So I think that wouldn't it be better for the climate if we extrapolate this over 15 years? And my question is there a point at which the emissions are so low that they don't matter anymore?
Both good questions. I'll discuss the development size first and the disparity between them. As you saw when I showed the current enhanced development menu applicability, which is for between 20,000 and 50,000 square feet, is 35 points, just a flat rate. And then anything over 50,000 square feet is 50 points, again, just a flat rate, whether that's 50,000 square feet or 500,000 square feet, same 50 points. And so one of the things that we're trying to address with these proposed amendments is altering that scale so that it slides according to the size of a project. So we're proposing 1,000 or 1 point per 1,000 square feet. So if it's a 10,000 square foot project, that's 10 points. If it's a 100,000 square foot project, it's 100 points. And that way the burden is a bit more divided evenly among all sorts of different development sizes. And that's something that we're hoping will work and help remedy that a little bit, that built into the fact that smaller developments have a smaller number of points starts to already redistribute some of that disparity. And then also, you noted that some of the items are also scaled according to the size and others aren't, and they're a flat, they are what they are number of points. We did try to add some of those that were scaled where it seemed like it was the most appropriate and where it seemed like there was the biggest impact to be able to do so, but without changing the entire structure of the enhanced development menu, which this is just an update. We didn't want to go that far at this time. So this is where we felt it was a really good middle ground that we can try out and see how it works. And if we need to shift towards more of the scaled point structure, we can do that. The beauty of the enhanced development menu is that it's voluntary. They have to earn points, but they get to choose how they earn the points. And if someone wants to earn the high point value items, they can do that. If they want to collect a lot of the smaller items, they can do that. So there's a lot of flexibility that gives the developers the ability to choose what works and makes the most sense for their particular development project as well as financially.
Okay. Well, I would say that that's not exactly voluntary. You have to do one or the other. You can't opt out altogether. So you have an option.
Yes, you have it.
There's a difference there.
Yes.
How many, you mentioned the state's going with this. How many communities in the metro? I know some of the mountain communities have done this for some time with a good result. How many in the metro area have these kind of standards?
And real quick, Mr. Wachtel, your hand was up too. If you want to weigh in with Ms. Long, you're welcome to, please.
Thank you.
I don't want to go back. I was going to add some context to the previous point, but if Councilor Abe, would you like me to? I guess we understanding that I think that staff fully agrees. Ideally, we would have a scale that fully increased with the size of development. That would be the most fair way to allocate points. We don't disagree with that at all. What we wanted to make sure to preserve, and this is our recommendation, ultimately, we were looking to council to help us write the language that you'd like to see in there. Ultimately, we were trying to preserve the concept that there was some amount of choice that related to the context and the site for developers to meet the enhanced development menu points. And we took the recommendation very seriously from Planning Commission, and we did an assessment of all the available points in the whole menu. Like if you just added them all up, what were all the potential points you could earn? It's a pretty big number, but when you actually look at it, there's a whole bunch of those points that will never be available to an individual site. Meaning, there are certain points that you can only earn if you're in certain contexts. There's certain points you can only earn if it's a certain landform. It won't work for every single site. So you have to start to then remove those because you can't assume that any site could earn all of those, or some of them are kind of one or the other. And so you start with this big pile of points. And then when you look at what would actually be possible on any given site, that shrinks a little bit. And so we took that number and we looked at where the cap was, where we could increase that point per square foot up to the highest amount, where we would be able to go tell a developer, like, you have to earn these points, but here's a realistic list of ways you could actually get that done without getting to a point where they only had one option, which was to build to a LEED standard. Because that should be, if we want to get to that point, our recommendation would be that's something that goes into a building code, because that's very much a building code requirement, and it loses the holistic nature of the way the enhanced development menu was originally envisioned, which was to incorporate, the project into the community based on the recommendations and the goals and the visions of both the comp plan and the sustainability plan. That's where the streetscapes and the community amenities and all those things come into play. So I think I just wanted to provide that context. Like, we really crunched the numbers, and the 150 reflects where we think we can go up to at this point to really preserve the intent and still be as fair as possible. Now, I'm all for continuing to push that, right? And we can keep coming up with new opportunities and ideas and keep coming back and increasing that and then maintain that fairness. So that's where our recommendation landed. And obviously we can go beyond that, but that's how we got there. So I just wanted to provide that.
What's the median square footage of these 20 projects a year? And where does that 150,000 square feet land on the continuum of projects that are going on in Lakewood? It seems to me that a 300 unit apartment building would be well above that in most cases. So can you give me a kind of a ballpark estimate of how many, what percentage of our projects are over 150,000 square feet?
It's a pretty small percentage. I don't have the median square footage off the top of my head, but I can certainly look that up and get that information to you another time. But as far as the number of projects that are over 150,000 square feet, I want to say that there have been 3 submitted so far since the enhanced development menu has been in effect. I do think that my colleague Jeff Wong, though, has some more information that he's able to share with you.
Okay, if he has more specifics, that's fine, but that kind of ballpark estimate is what I was looking for. It really puts it into context. Community amenities. You mentioned wildlife habitat. How is this going to add to wildlife habitat in the built environment?
Great question. One of the items that we added in the enhanced development menu was the potential to earn points for pollinator landscaping. So designing a landscape specifically to have native plants and different types of plants, a certain design that does accommodate for pollinators and birds and other types of typically urban wildlife to be able to use those contiguous areas of landscaping as small pockets of habitat. And if we get enough of these small pockets of habitat around the city, then we'll have more of that.
There you go. I need more bees out here on my pear trees. Thank you. I think that's all I have at the moment. Thank you very much. And a lot of hard work went into this. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Mr. Wong, you had your hand up. I think you maybe wanted to engage on one of those questions.
Yeah, sure. I just wanted to provide some additional context to the question about square footage and kind of the distribution. So we looked at the past 4 years of permit data, and there were about 77 approved cases that went through the major site plan process, and 11 of those, or about 15%, were 150,000 square feet or higher. So about 15%.
Great information. Thank you, sir. Okay, I have Ms. Franks, Ms. Mayette Guerrero, and then Ms. Strom.
Thanks, Mayor Paul. First, I wanted to thank staff for this amazing amount of information and work that went into this. As somebody who cares a whole lot about pollinators, and Charlie, you're not close enough for my bees to be able to help you out at all, but I'd love if they could. The thing that I want to explore a little more, because I don't think I have a good understanding yet, is on the fee in lieu. So I know that you talked a little bit earlier about sort of the data being more readily available and maybe higher quality data for the 5 years. But we know the Planning Commission had wanted the 15 years. And I thought I heard you mention there that there was a reporting cycle and maybe that would sort of true things up across time. But I didn't quite understand how that would. So could you provide a little bit more context so I can see if we're achieving sort of the vision of the Planning Commission just through a different mechanism?
Sure. So the way that we would we would be envisioning the 5-year amount of the greenhouse gas fee in lieu is using the most recent data that we have from Excel's annual community reports that they provide to us. We get those usually in June or July each year that shows the actual emissions that the city had. And so that's what we would anticipate using as the emissions factor to then multiply that by 5 years. And that's what we can assume that a development is going to have for their 5 years of operation. And that's what their fee in lieu would be based on. When we would switch that to a 15-year timeframe, I don't think we can fairly use that most recent actual data point extrapolated over 15 years because we know that the grid is getting cleaner every year. And what we don't know is how much cleaner and if it will stay on the track that it currently is. Excel is currently going through a process with the Public Utilities Commission to go through their process of figuring out what their grid mix is going to be long-term and how they're going to bring online more renewable energy into the mix. But that's still pretty speculative at this point, and it felt too speculative to be using data that is not yet approved and is not in control of the city at all for such a long period of time, given what financial impact that would then end up being on developers.
But help me understand the piece then. So if you had, let's just say $5 for the 5 years and $15 for the 15 years, just to make things, then there is a $10 that is in the category of we don't think it'll be that number, but it'll be some number. And so by not extending out the horizon, then we lose some opportunity. So is there a way, and I'm mainly just throwing this out there for maybe staff to think about, I don't need an answer tonight, is for a way to sort of either build into the process that there'll be a factor that will be created, and then that would be factored in at some point. So it's almost like a placeholder, but knowing how to capture those funds. I guess I'm just concerned about losing that opportunity for those funds, and still maybe having the grid becoming cleaner doesn't move at the pace we want, and we didn't really capture what we could have. So again, I don't like working with bad data, but if there's a way in which to placeholder in some way that allows us to capture dollars, and again, this is for fee in lieu. This is where folks don't want to. So I want to make sure we don't lose an opportunity. So I would appreciate any additional research that could be done and then brought back as maybe an educational piece during the next session.
Certainly. And I do just want to add as well that this is what we are kind of looking at with the benchmarking program in the future. How that would essentially work is buildings would report their annual emissions to us each year. And then if they exceed what they're allowed to emit, then they would need to pay a fee each of those years that they're exceeding that. So in a long-term scenario, a benchmarking program like what Denver has adopted, as well as other cities around Colorado, Fort Collins has this, and around the country, that seems like this is really a more appropriate mechanism to track the long-term emissions and the long-term performance of buildings to make sure that they're remaining efficient and continuing to perform as they were intended to. That said, we will certainly look into if there is what the outcome of this process that Excel is currently going through would be, and if we would have better data that comes out of that we can then incorporate into something like you mentioned.
Thank you. That piece that you just added on the reporting loop, that was the piece that I wanted that more information about. I think that answers most of the question, but anything more that you could bring. But then that actually lets us true up across the lifespan of the building, which is what I was looking for. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Mr. Wachtel, your hand is up.
I think Councilor Franks got her answer, but just for I think there's two factors to think about. And so I just wanted to point them both out. One is what happens to our emissions factor from Xcel Energy, right? And they have these grand plans to decarbonize by, or be 80% by 2050, but we don't really know how that's going. So the approach if we took a 15-year approach, is we could say, okay, they're telling us they're going to get here by this year, but we don't know if that happens in year 15 or in year 5, but we know where they're going. So we could apply some kind of discount rate to the 15 years and come up with a ballpark number. Okay. So we could definitely do that. I think though, what's important to remember is there's more than two, but there's two really big pieces to the puzzle of what happens to that building over time. One is what happens to the energy being, how's the energy generated that's coming through and being used in that building. And so that's the grid mix from Xcel that we can try to guess, and create some kind of discount rate. But the second piece is what happens to the use and the occupancy of that building. And I think it's, things change, right? Like what happened, who's occupying and using this building over time becomes more and more uncertain. Like even at the point when a new building receives its certificate of occupancy, is there a restaurant in that retail space? If it's a mixed use building, is it a retail shop? Is it a dry cleaner? Is it, what's there? And those things can significantly change how a building is performing. And so I think that's where a performance requirement, that missing piece we're not bringing right now, but we could bring in the future, is the better tool. Now, on the flip side of that, so if we really want to be doing the best, the best practice, at least currently, I'm sure in the next few years, someone will have another great idea, but the best practice would be, let's go out a few years because we can capture that initial impact. And then let's have an ongoing system that really helps buildings manage themselves and be efficient. But we don't have that next thing in place yet. And we don't know that we necessarily will, or if a future council will want to do that, or how complicated it'll be to impact it, or to implement it. There's a lot of pieces there. So I think that's the decision that, is in front of council, is like, do we guess and try to prorate it somehow? Or do we want to try to be accurate for a upfront little chunk of time and then try to put in this more, appropriate mechanism for long-term? So just wanted to reiterate that's the choice, I think, in front of you, and we're open to either one. We just need some direction.
Thank you. Appreciate that extra information.
Great. Thank you. Ms. Matt Guerrero.
Hi, I'm really excited about this conversation, as I'm sure lots of us are, it seems like. And I want to reiterate what Councilor Abel said, which is just it's very, very clear how much work went into this and that it's excellent. And now I'm going to ask you a bunch of aggressive questions, but I'm thrilled with, I think, what we're already being presented with for sure. I do just want to, since we're on the point of the fee in lieu, I also have some questions about that. And I think that the stakes of climate change are too high to rely on a future council's hypothetical willingness to get the benchmarking program done. And that it makes more sense to actually have those more aggressive fee timelines and structures on the front end. And then when benchmarking is brought back before council, at the same time, bring back up shifting that fee structure. That would be my personal preference. I also think that when we really look at the way that the metro is in a housing crisis and a housing boom simultaneously, right? That means that the amount of potential building that will happen in Lakewood over the next couple of years while we are trying to get that figured out is large, right? So I think that we have a really great opportunity with a pro-sustainability council and a pro-sustainability, like culture in Lakewood right now. Like really, when you talk to people, it's very clear, and we don't know how that'll change. And what we know won't change is the urgency of the actual issue that we're trying to solve for. So that would be my preference. I also was wondering, just in terms of the lieu amount, if you could talk more about how the amount was actually calculated. So is that fee actually equivalent to how much it costs to put some of these things into place, and or how much it would cost for Lakewood to really be benefiting from that fee? I think something that has sometimes happened in fees in lieu is that developers that are not local and or not small, the fee is like too easy for them, basically. And I don't mean to say that we should be using the fee as a fine. I don't mean that. But I do mean, like, if the fees are not aggressive enough, particularly when you're looking at those really large amounts of square feet, I get worried that then the sort of the rate structure of that is not actually keeping up with the impact of that development. And so it feels, so if you've got really specific things on that, but otherwise that would be like in the next iteration of this conversation to talk about. Well,
Sure.
I've got like a couple of other things. Should I like list them all at once and then you can brain dump back at me? I like never really know how to do it.
Either I'm happy to answer the fee question now if you want.
Yeah, great.
Okay. So just to clarify, are we talking about the enhanced development menu fee in lieu or the greenhouse gas fee in lieu? Or
Oh
both?
yeah, both to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I know that they work slightly differently, but the question is similar in either. I phrase it a little different, but yeah.
Yes. The enhanced development menu fee in lieu, we are anticipating that being approximately $4,000 per point based on all of those different development scenarios that we ran, and we assigned points to each development to have them earn what they needed to comply, and then to figure out what the cost to them was going to be in order to implement those. And so we've figured out what the cost per point was on average, and it averages at the moment around $4,000 a point. We do want to make sure that we're able to adjust that as needed when there are times of high demand and prices go up. And we want to make sure, like you said, that we're still able to get the appropriate benefits, since it's going to cost us more as well to then implement some of those similar types of things if we're doing that for a city project as part of this program. So that's where the enhanced development fee in lieu.
I'm so sorry. Can I ask just a little follow-up on that, which is like, wouldn't actually the amount it costs per point be different depending on the square foot of the thing? So when you say on average, that doesn't really make sense to me, given that like the cost of energy efficient appliances, for example, in a really large development is like a lot more than the cost of energy efficient appliances in a townhome.
Sure. So how we did that, as how we averaged it out, was we took the number of points that each of these various scenarios, I want to say there were like 16 or 18 scenarios that we did. So we took the number of points that each of those was required to do, and we calculated the cost that each of them was going to spend to do a realistic number of those, and then determine what the cost per point was for each individual development. And then we averaged we averaged the average cost per point across all of the developments. So each development was assigned its own cost per point, and then we averaged the cost per point for all of those scenarios together. Does that make sense? Does that clarify that? Okay. So that is where the enhanced development menu one came from. So it is to an extent then scaled to depend on the size of the development, because we had developments ranging from single family homes, since we were doing those for the greenhouse gas mitigation program part as well, all the way up to 550,000 square foot multifamily projects. So there's a wide range that was represented there. For the greenhouse gas mitigation program, the fee in lieu that we are proposing to use is $76 per square foot. That is the social cost of carbon that is recommended by the federal government at a 2.5% discount rate, which is what's recommended by the state of Colorado and some of their various climate legislation as well. So we're trying to piggyback on state and federal sources as much as possible. So that is $76 currently that we're proposing to use per metric ton of carbon.
Great, thank you. That was very clear. You explained those extremely well and how you got to those numbers. I was really impressed with like articulating that. I would also say that like I would be interested in the way that all of these things are being like sort of scaled rather than averaged, and having fees work in a similar way. But depends on where other staff are at, and I'm happy to be told that that's like logistically like not a nightmare, right? Like that's fine. But that's kind of where my brain goes. And then I recognize on this max points that this 150 amount is meant to be. I totally take your point of like, we are not trying to create a LEED building standard. If we want to adopt or change our building codes to be LEED, like we could do that. But I do really specifically wonder if there's something to be said about around maybe not having having a maximum for all developments within a certain range, but having some type of thing for outliers of saying, right, like over 550,000, say, if that's like the max that we've calculated this list for. If it's over that, then like they have to go through a different, maybe special like analysis through planning or something like that, where there's like a fail safe for those developments that might occur that are much larger than the average thing that we are not currently accounting for. Because again, to Mr. Abel's point about that just being then really immense impact also seems important that we have a mechanism that's like, oh, this is a different development. This is not the average thing that we see in Lakewood. This is something that is sort of above and beyond or a little bit different than we're used to. Like, can we be more protective given that scale and given, the money that it already takes to do that? It will also obviously be much more expensive to do the efficiencies, but probably investors who are investing in that scale of development can also invest in sustainability.
Sure. That is something that we thought about ways that we could try to do through the enhanced development menu. But I think what we ended up realizing was that it's the way that the greenhouse gas mitigation program works. That does scale to any size of development since it's based on their total square footage and the projected amount of emissions per square foot. And so that's, I think, the place where we would be able to capture of the greater impact of super large scale developments is in that particular part of the program rather than the enhanced development menu, since there's, in addition, just limited space available on any given development site. There's a limited number of things that we can even do. It would be nearly impossible to fit 500 points worth of anything on an actual development site. Certainly try to brainstorm some more and see if there's a different mechanism there that we can try to look at for those super large scale developments. But just keep in mind too that the greenhouse gas mitigation program does capture the impacts of some of those largest developments just by the way that it's designed.
Yeah, that's helpful. I wonder if there might be a way to just draw that connection more clearly. I think it's important that, obviously policy reads as policy, but policy also reads as public doctrine. And so I think that might be something to include that's been thought through. I was also didn't see, and it's perhaps that I did not actually read the entirety of the document with the level of fine-tooth comb that I would love to, on like basically, so I saw renewable energy projects, electric vehicle, public charging, but I didn't really see, and then like building electrification, but I didn't notice anything that was about like EV or renewable readiness of like essentially just having the actual like wire capacity that's necessary. And I think that it's already on the state law that you have to, if you are the contractor, you have to like offer that, and then whoever the developers can like opt in to that or something. There's like a thing there, but you guys probably know what I'm talking about.
I'm not specifically familiar with what might be required at the state level, but our zoning code already does have EV parking or EV charging, EV readiness requirements built into our parking standards for most types of development.
Amazing, thank you. And then I've got a question on water efficiency. All of the water efficiency really seems to be based on positive, like planting native grasses and low water tolerance and like using drainage ditches to your advantage. But I don't see anything that's encouraging like reducing turf area or like using particular types of lawn that require less water. And then I also don't see anything about water efficiency in terms of like the appliances, right? In terms of that. And I know, again, like some of those are things that just exist either in our zone or in our state. So I was hoping you could clarify for me.
Sure. With the item that is in the enhanced development menu that addresses more of the eliminating areas of sod and having low water usage outdoors is the water budgeting. There's a tool that the EPA created several years ago called WaterSense that allows you to input different types of landscaping, including sod. So you can have sod still, and it helps you determine what your gallons per square foot is. And then the Denver Water has a benchmark that they use. Currently 12 gallons per square foot is the system-wide benchmark, system-wide average. And so currently, as long as a development is lower than the benchmark of 12 gallons per square foot, once you factor in all of their different types of landscaping, the super low water usage, the xeric areas, along with any of their turf grass areas, the overall site average, as long as that's below the city or the benchmark, then they would be able to earn some of those points. We're looking at proposing to adjust how that is allowing people to go even more, earn points for being even more under the benchmark than currently. Right now it's, are you under it or not? Yes or no, and you get the points. We'd like to adjust that so that the farther below the benchmark that you are, the more points you can earn for being extra resource sensitive. As far as any of
Hey, Caitlin, you're breaking up a little bit. I wonder if
the interior water issues goes.
Caitlin, you're breaking up a little bit. I don't know if you can either, maybe take off your camera and see if that helps, or one of us could, Jeff or I could jump in.
Let's see if this helps at all.
That sounds better. Thank you.
Okay, would you like me to repeat?
I think we caught most of it, but maybe you could explain how the proposed update would work for below the 12 gallons per square foot that we're offering more points as they ratchet down.
Sure. So I believe that our current the current point structure allows 5 points for just being under the benchmark of 12 gallons per square foot. What we would be proposing is to increase the number of points. I think it was 1 or 2 points for every couple of gallons below that benchmark that you are. So if you are averaging 10 gallons per square foot, you're getting a better number of points than if you're at 12 gallons per square foot. And same for if you're at 7 or 8 gallons per square foot, then it's even more points. So that's how we're trying to encourage there to be low water usage. There is a floor. So you can't go, there's a limit to the number of points you can earn by reducing your water usage, because we don't want to encourage people to completely eliminate landscaping. But there's a lot of ways to do water-wise landscaping that can still have a really low gallons per square foot.
And there was a question about the appliances.
Yep. Sure. So the interior water usage, given where this lies in the zoning code, we don't often have the full building plans available to us at that stage in the process. And so it's difficult for us to regulate things that are internal to the building through the zoning code. That's one of the challenges that we have with some of the, with looking at water efficiency inside of buildings. In addition, since we have so many different water districts, it'd be important to make sure that we're coordinating among those to ensure that it meets all of their requirements and needs. And there's just, at the moment, there's too many to efficiently be able to collaborate with on and make sure that we're getting something that will work for everybody.
Mr. Wachtel, please.
Thanks. I want to just add, I think, Councilwoman, you mentioned the state standards. And so it is state law in Colorado that you have to use water certified fixtures. So I'm sure people can get around it, but theoretically you shouldn't be able to buy as a contractor and install a fixture that's not already EPA water sense, and that's at the state level. And Ms. Long wasn't with us at the time, so she doesn't have this context, but when we did the previous building code update in 2015, we talked about this, and because it was a state, whether we needed to codify that in the Lakewood building code, and the decision was made that because it was a state standard, we didn't need to do that. But when the time comes that we update our building codes again, which hopefully won't be too far into the future, we should certainly take a look at all the internal workings of buildings and see where we can reduce water. That would be probably the most appropriate place to deal with fixtures and plumbing. Thanks.
Okay. So I recognize that there are still additional questions. I have 3 more. So just to keep track. I really appreciate you getting into the weeds with me. You can tell that I have a background in sustainability policy, so I just won't be satisfied not really understanding something like this. My next question is Ms. Long really alluded to it, which was that the need for the water efficiency to not then reduce green space. So I'm wondering, I see within like some of the social amenity things, right? There's things like outdoor exercise equipment, shade structures, etc. So I'm wondering if it might be possible to add something maybe in that space that is around ensuring, sort of explicitly ensuring like soft landscaping or like square footage of communal outdoor space or something that's just like a little bit more specific, of recognizing that, you know, the open space and green space is a need that comes up a lot, particularly in my ward where we don't have as much park space per person and we do have quite a lot of densification happening. So actually having the apartment buildings be able to have that counting towards their the social connection amenity or the like social community cohesion amenity component. And like I said, it's maybe it's like maybe already sort of within there, and in which case then I'm excited about it. But I just want to like draw attention to that component of the plan. And then I have a question about affordability and a question about single family developments. With affordability, did you talk to West Metro Housing and did they say that they needed to be not a part of this? Because I think that sometimes within the sustainability world, when we look at particularly building electrification and building efficiency, we often say, oh, that's more expensive, so that means that we shouldn't require affordable housing units to do it. But most affordable housing is being subsidized in other ways, right? And so their total cost of the project is a part of what they are submitting to, say, CHAFA. And so what ends up happening is you end up with people who can't afford their rent also then end up being in places where they have higher efficiency bills and like, you know, worse air quality because they have gas appliances or whatever the thing is. And that for me doesn't resonate as equitability within the sustainability space. So there's that question. So if they were explicitly asked, I trust West Metro. I mean, some of their buildings are LEED certified and I think that they work really hard at sustainability. So if that is what their recommendation was, I trust that. But if it's not, then I don't actually know that eliminating affordable housing from this menu is the way to go about that equitable topic, which is obviously what's being, you know, attempted with that. And then on the single family homes, when there are developments that are like a lot of single family homes at once, are we looking at the total square footage of that, like the entire development, or are we looking unit by unit? So those are my two last big questions. Although I'm sure more will come to me before you all are off the hook.
Sounds good. So as far as the affordability goes, yes, Metro West was part of our conversations through most of this. I don't know that they had a specific recommendation one way or the other, but our understanding from their representative who participated with us was that because of the financing that they have to go through, there are already such strict requirements on the type of construction that they have to do in order to meet HUD requirements that it would essentially be able to pass any of the EDM complications outright, including if they're doing LEED, that's 100% of their points right there. Many of them do electrification. Many of them have solar on them. So for Metro West specifically, I think the conversation was that they are already doing most of the things that are in the menu. And then in talking with our CDBG coordinator as well, again, the financing mechanisms for affordable housing, it requires that there be usually a pretty high level of construction. It's a good quality construction if they're doing something new. And so the concerns as far as the amenities and air quality just aren't there as much. And it seemed like a good way to try to incentivize more mixed income housing where, say, 20% of the units are affordable and the remainder are market rate, because then the developer can exempt the square footage of those 20% of units from the points that they have to earn for the overall project. So it was kind of a way to try to incentivize that, as well as not add additional process and requirements onto affordable housing projects, which already face so much paperwork and such difficult timelines to get everything in, that we just didn't want to add to that specific burden.
Okay.
And then on the subdivision question, once a subdivision, I believe it's 3 or more lots, then they do have to submit a major site plan for the overall subdivision. That includes any of their public areas and that kind of thing. So we would be able to review it at that point and recommend any of the amenities that would fit in that type of context for more of a residential neighborhood subdivision. And that would be based on the anticipated square footage of the home units being built.
Okay. Ms. Strom.
Thank you. I too, as we're looking at the fee in lieu for the EDM, would like to see that longer than 5 years. And I understand with all the moving parts that are going on right now, we won't get perfect, but kind of as you had mentioned, that staff had found that, you know, the return on investment for putting some of these items in comes in around year 8 to year 12. It'd be great to see something that maybe aligns with some of that so that we're getting a little bit more in. I don't feel like 5 years is enough to really disincentivize utilizing this rather than putting in the infrastructure and the development already. So that's just my thoughts on that. And then separately, my question is actually with regards to the compliance rate. I was wondering if you could explain that to me, that there's only a 25 to 75% compliance rate. I'm just wondering why that's not a 100%, and wondering if I'm just missing part of what that process actually is.
I apologize. I'm sure that was just a miscommunication on my part. When I mentioned the 25% and 75% compliance, that was the range that we used to project the estimated revenues for the fees in lieu. So hopefully,
so maybe then we've got more that are actually picking from the menu of options rather than picking the fee in lieu. Is that what that means? Right.
So the Jeff may need to remind me how exactly we used that, but I believe it was that we did that for those projects that were eligible to do the enhanced development menu fee in lieu, which is again only if they have more than 50 points, and then they can only buy down to 50 points. So they still have to do something on site. They can't completely pay a fee in lieu and do nothing on the site. But for those that had the ability to pay the fee in lieu, I think we took our scenarios and 25% of them did, and then 75% of them did, and we used that as the range. And then similarly for the greenhouse gas mitigation, assuming that 25% did mitigation and 75% did mitigation, and figuring that the range will be somewhat in there, that those are the quintile or the quartiles. So it's what we based that range on solely for the purposes of projecting what the potential revenue could be. It has no standing on the actual program or anything like that. It was just to look at potential revenue generation.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Ms. Stewart.
Thank you. I will be brief. I know one of the things that we need to get consensus on and kind of hand back to you is the calculating the fees and lieu based on 5 years versus 15 or however long we want to do that. I agree. We are, we're in a crisis. And so I do think we need to take bold action in recognition of the fact that climate change is not going away. In fact, it is getting significantly worse and will continue to impact our lives in the next generations. I am wondering, though, because I think that the benchmarking program is more appropriate, but it doesn't exist. So, and to your point, that, we don't know if we're going to have a council who is going to be supportive of a benchmarking program. So what do we need to do to make that happen? Because that just seems to make more sense. I realize we may have to do something now and then go and fix it and do it later. And I'm okay with that. But I think it is fairly obvious to me that the benchmarking program is appropriate and more what we need to be doing. So I'm just wondering, why isn't it here, and what do we need to do?
I will let Mr. Wachtel answer that one. You're muted.
You're muted again.
I lowered my hand, but I forgot to unmute. Let me just paint a picture of what would probably need to happen to get to a benchmarking ordinance. So the concept behind this is actually that you want to ask a certain group of buildings that have the ability to do this to report their energy use, potentially their water use on an annual basis. And the reason for that, the first step of that, and this is in our sustainability plan from 2015, so this is not a new idea, is that cities where this is taking place, just by people having to report their energy use and pay attention to it, see about somewhere between a 2 and a 4% efficiency increase right off the bat. And that's even if you don't create any then standards that they then have to meet over time. But the more advanced of these policies say, okay, we're going to create this reporting mechanism. And now we're going to show you that if you're a multifamily building, you're a similar building to your use and occupancy and vintage is performing here, and here's where you are, and here's where our community goals are. And we're going to make sure that you are working to ratchet down. And we can do that not just by, kind of a stick approach, but also by saying, here's all the rebate. We can design the right kind of rebates or channel the right kind of rebates and programs and incentives from our utilities and others, right? And really get those targeted as opposed to, sending these things out in the universe and hoping that people will do it. So it provides a lot of information and allows you to focus your efforts to find the biggest opportunities to save energy, save water. So that's the basic idea. But to put that into effect, you need a bunch of things. You need to know all the types of buildings and sizes you have in your city. That is not something that we just have offhand for the existing built environment. That's a lot of work to mine data from the assessor's office and truth all that on the ground. Then you have to do outreach and understand who owns those buildings, right? Like the stakeholders involved, are they capable of reporting all that? Like what's the platform that they're going to use to report that? And how are you going to do all that outreach to teach folks how to even comply? And so the cities that have done this have like this period of time they have to ramp up all that outreach and really help energy managers or building owners understand what they have to do to do that. And they typically start by saying, okay, we're going to start with 50,000 square foot buildings for the first year, couple of years, then we're going to drop it down, right? In Fort Collins, they started big. They're working their way down to 5,000 square feet. That's a lot of work. And it's great. And if you want to create, you can create some penalties for non-reporting and all that, but typically you want to be very forgiving at first, right? And like really help where you kind of take that approach. So that's a lot of barriers. The good news with the state passed their benchmark ordinance is they've got to figure out a lot of that reporting and outreach now at the state level. And the good news is if they have and think about the software piece too, that always is like an added complication, right? Like, is there a common reporting? Are we building that? And are we having to then have an IT infrastructure cost here, or is there a third party? So if we're able to see how the state handles it and then piggyback on their infrastructure, their reporting system, make it easy, and we want to ramp ours down, or ratchet ours down below 50,000 square foot, we could do that. But that's not going to just happen overnight because, we like to do this thoughtfully and carefully and make sure there's a community process. So I think that I just wanted to paint that picture. So I don't think it's something we could, even with council really eager, we could jump on it and try to do it. But to implement what we're bringing forward now and then try to figure all that out quickly would be a pretty huge lift. So you're talking about a couple of years realistically to get there. And especially to let the state, if we want to piggyback on the state and learn from them, we need to give them another year or so before we'll see how that's working.
Okay.
Does that help?
It seems, it definitely does. I appreciate that. It seems like the fees in lieu would be a really beautiful marriage between those two things. The ability to have fees in lieu to actually help then these buildings who are trying to ratchet down in a benchmarking program. What a wonderful way to use those fees and direct them to be able to help other buildings become more efficient, which I know they're doing anyway, but it would just seem like a very nice circular situation that we could have.
Yeah, and I just want to add, I want to caution, like, we shouldn't think of one either or, because what we're talking about is new development, and benchmarking ordinance, even if it takes us a couple years, would be for all buildings like existing. So we don't want to think, oh, if we do 15 years here, we don't need the other. Like, and I think, some of the other suggestions that maybe we start with a little longer extended, but then we can always adjust it if we get a benchmarking and performance ordinance in, is a potential suggestion that staff could take from council and think about as we try to design this too. So that we don't only do one piece or the other. We need to probably think about how it all goes together.
Yes, agreed. Thank you for that clarification. That is very helpful for people to know. Yeah, I don't think our work will not be done tonight, regardless of the decision we make. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Great. That's the first round. I see Mr. Abel. I'll go to him for the second round. Just to do a quick check-in, I'm hearing that folks want to engage on a little bit longer than 5 years, and whether that's all the way up to 15 or not, but something more that has some flexibility once we get to benchmarking. And then I need a little bit more clarification too on the differences between capping at 150, heard cap it, but then have something for a larger type of project, or do it unlimited. So Mr. Abel, second round.
Thank you. I think that's a pretty good summation as well. Firstly, I do hope Jonathan wasn't suggesting that we use the state's freshly rolled out software. I've seen them roll out software before, to the regret of most agencies that use it. Secondly, along the lines of what Rebecca was talking about, could we use the fees in lieu to retrofit existing residences? Folks that can't afford to put solar panels on their house or do other things that we would like to see. Maybe we could help out a little bit and reduce the existing emissions from places that are already built out. Is that a possibility?
Yes, I think that's definitely a possibility. And that is, I think, the main driving force that was behind the Advisory Commission's recommendation to investigate a REMP type of program in the first place, was to be able to use those the penalties that were collected in order to help the existing built environment retrofit, especially for low and moderate income households. And so that is, I think, what we have been envisioning as kind of like the perfect type of project that we would be able to hopefully go forward and fund with any of those revenues that come in. And beyond just residential households, from the conversations that we've had with some of the developers and contractors who we've worked with through this, some assistance on the business side as well, either for retrofits or for training and more technical assistance, is something else that we've heard could be a potential need.
Thank you. I think that would be a great deed, is to put that money back to work for what it was intended for. And I would like to make kind of an editorial comment about the process. The charter allows for the planning department to make recommendation on land use matters. It doesn't say recommendations as amended by the planning department. I think we can find a way that might have leave a little more integrity intact in our charter's intention by presenting I've never seen a planning commission report that has been altered before it got to us. I understand why, and I understand that it's data driven, but perhaps that would be better left to the conversation than in putting forth an alternative to Planning Commission's recommendation, especially the first PDF in the bunch. I don't know how many of us were willing to read the entirety of both plans. So I think our process has been tried and true for many, many years. And there are ways to handle these suggestions. Thank you.
Okay. All right, folks. So we got a decent, I think, well, I don't know. I'll have to ask Mr. Wachtel or Ms. Long if we have something, enough direction, at least on the cap or on the years to move forward and bring something back.
I think I don't want to, what I've heard the most maybe consensus around, although I'm not sure I've heard consensus, is definitely extend it beyond 5 years. I haven't heard a huge push to go all the way to 15 necessarily, but that somewhere, in the middle might make sense. And I think, when I heard a suggestion that said, we know, if we think that the return on the investment in the mitigation measures, like putting renewables on site, is in that 8 to 12 year range, that maybe like a 10-year would make sense, that, something like that could be justifiable, and logical, because we're saying, make this investment up front, you're going to recoup it in 10 years. And if you don't want to, then here's the cost. But I'm not sure if that's correct. So I would look for more direction on that. And I don't think I've heard whether or not at all about whether the 150 sits well with folks, or you want us to increase it. But I'm still looking for that, unless I missed something.
I'm getting a lot of heads shaking. There's some no's on as far as going, potentially up to 10 or beyond. I think that's a good start. I also want to mention that, next phases, would we get this codified, bring it back out to the community, and allow for more input that way and people to weigh in, and certainly amendments can take place as we go forward with a first and second type reading process. Ms. Franks, your hand is up.
Yes, Mayor Paul, I think building off, I'd be certainly supportive of amendments, but what I was hearing, and maybe I wrote my notes down correctly, was that one suggestion was, the cap of 150 wouldn't account for an outlier, something quite unique. And I think as long as we maybe address that in some way, I think that was the mitigation there, was we just didn't want it to be there where you come up against that and it's like, well, then everything beyond that sort of doesn't get any sort of assessment against it. So I think if there's some mechanism for a variance, if it varies by X, then there'd be an extra process to go through, or an analysis that it goes through. I think that would be something that I'd be very open to seeing.
I'm getting some yeses on that as well. Thanks for summarizing that. Mr. Wachtel, is that something that can be addressed?
We can certainly try. I'm not sure I have, I like the notion. I'm not sure I have a tangible proposal. I'm not sure I've heard, how we might do that. And I think we need to talk to our legal staff about how we would fairly do that. We don't want to create something that could, that's not defendable.
Sure.
Right? But we can certainly, we'll try to figure something out and bring it forward without a doubt.
Let's frankly go with the intent of that. And if we're not able to, that'll be part of that. Then council will divert to either the 150 or the other recommendation of no limit. We can work through that.
That sounds good.
Okay. Council, anything else on this portion before I go to public input? Would also, these are great questions, and it was, again, a great discussion. And as we move forward and this starts to take greater shape, there might be more questions. And so also always remember, if we have the opportunity to bring those questions in prior to facilitate those discussions and get more responses going, that'd be great too. So I'll now open public input. This is your opportunity to weigh in on this topic that we just discussed. Again, two folks weighed in, Ms. Peters and Mr. Comden, on Lakewood Speaks. And so you'll have 3 minutes. If you want to raise your hand, *9 to request to speak, *6 to unmute. If you give us your name and address, or name and ward, we will get you started. When your time is at 30 seconds, you'll hear a ding. And when your time is up, you'll hear a double ding. And again, this is related to Article 13, Sustainable Development Standards Update. Madam Clerk, if you want to bring those folks in, I'll get my timer going.
Caller Garrett.
Evening, Garrett. Let me get the timer going first. All right, you are in. If you want to give us your address or ward, we'll get you started. Garrett Hyatt, you are in. If you want to unmute, *6. Garrett, *6 to unmute. Okay, Madam Clerk, we'll go to the next one, please.
Call ending in 1910.
All right, 1910. If you want to give us your name and address or name and ward, we'll get you started.
Hi, this is Andrea Gelfuso, and thank you, Jonathan and Caitlin, for your amazing work on this. It's so exciting to see that the LAC can work with the city on sustainability, and you guys have done an incredible job. As a Lakewood resident, my concern is always on how to finance energy efficient renovation for low income residents, because that's such a big piece of this. There's relatively little new construction, and so helping people to afford to stay in their houses with energy efficient renovation is such an important part of this for me. So I appreciate that the fee in lieu would help support that. But that is one of the several uses for those energy in lieu funds. So could you address how you would envision the allocation of those funds among the different uses for the fee in lieu funds? Thank you.
Great, thank you. All right, next up.
Call ending in 3437.
3437. If you give us your name and address or name and ward, we'll get you going.
My name is Frank Sturgill. Hello?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Yes, my name is Frank Sturgill. I've got a variety of comments to make. Insulation of buildings was not included in the mitigation of greenhouse gases when it's a major issue. There's also been requests for documents of roof sections and R values of the city's buildings. That still has not been fulfilled. That's a couple of core requests that I know of, including to Anita Springsteen. That has not been fulfilled. It seems like the city is hiding something, and it needs to come forward with that and be transparent. What is the city insulating its buildings? How well is it insulated? And are they to the value of our value of what houses are? And I know that's not true. So get those records forward and start including this into the plan. That's at least 10% of all greenhouse gases throughout the country is insulation of buildings. And we have a major problem. The building codes do not deal with existing buildings and insulation at all. And new construction only mandates our values to be 1/2 of what houses are. And also a next item would be construction waste. Most construction waste is gypsum board, and because more than 90% of steel and concrete are recycled. If you go down I-76 and you see those giant piles of those are crushed concrete, and that's the process of being recycled. So gypsum board, there is a factory of gypsum in the town of Gypsum. It's right down I-70. You can also go down Train. But the problem is that paper on both sides. Canada recycles all their gypsum. So when you'll see Portland and Seattle, because they buy from from Vancouver. But here in the United States, we don't do that because our U.S. system does not want to have to peel off or remove that paper to recycle it. So if we have a recycling program, I think you need to be talking to U.S. system as to how this is going to get done. If you want a waste diversion program, that's it. And I didn't see that into the plans either. So those are the two major issues I had, and they need to be addressed pretty badly, especially the installation. That's actually legitimate greenhouse gas crimes we're not being given due process on. Thank you.
All right, so your time is up. Thank you. Okay, anybody else want to give input on this presentation? Okay, we'll go ahead and close this portion. Appreciate the two callers, and certainly I know our team look at all of those, and regarding the standards as far as how those dollars will be distributed, I think that's a larger conversation related to the budget once we realize what those fees and dollars might be to know how to send those for energy efficiency. Next up, we have a discussion on entertainment district applications. And there was a staff presentation on Lakewood Speaks. Nobody indicated a desire to speak on that. I know there might be some folks who want to weigh in when we get to the public input portion. And just for reference, this is the next step as far as the application. And then there was some discussion as to sustainability standards upon implementation of this. So Ms. Hodson, I'll turn it over to you.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So we talked about this April 11th. And since then, staff has worked together to try to put together what those sustainable kind of measures should be as it relates to entertainment districts. So I would ask Travis Parker to kind of frame up this conversation for City Council. And I think he's in the waiting room right now. So if we could let Travis in, that'd be great. Thank you.
All right. There's Mr. Parker. Good evening, Mr. Parker.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for your time on this issue tonight. We, at your last discussion, you had asked us to look into some potential sustainability requirements on new entertainment districts. And we've submitted to you in your packet, it should have been on Lakewood Speaks, or it was on Lakewood Speaks, some proposals, including proposals around waste, such as a 3-bin system in new entertainment districts, zero waste plan, and a diversion report. Some transportation recommendations, including a multimodal assessment, encouraging the use of multimodal transportation and wayfinding signage, and then a lot of bicycle parking requirements, including one space per every 1,500 feet of open area in the entertainment area, or in the consumption area, lockable bike spaces with good access and visibility, temporary corral locations for large events, and wayfinding for the bike signage, or for the bike parking. So sort of with that background, I think this is ripe for council discussion, and we look forward to hearing your path forward.
Great. Thank you. I appreciate the time and effort as well as the suggestions. This is all new territory for us as a city. And I think these are going to be things that we're going to learn about as we go, if they're meaningful or not, or if we need to add. And I also appreciate the fact that there might be a district that's 1 or 2 blocks versus something that's quite larger. And until we really know what that looks like, I think we'll be learning. So I don't have any questions. Council, are there any questions? Okay. Ms. Stewart.
Yeah, this is general questions about all of this, correct? Okay, great. So I had a couple of questions about the red line version of the ordinance for starters. So the first one is 5.39110D. It is the section on removal of entertainment district designation. I am not seeing, as I'm reading there, I'm not seeing any sort of like a warning system, or, something is flagged and you have a certain amount of days to correct before we snap into a mechanism like a hearing. Think that would probably be, just to reduce administrative burden particularly, but also to allow landlords to correct complaints. That would be one.
So Ms. Stewart, let's try to can we get that answered so we don't.
Oh, sorry. I apologize. Yes.
That's okay. Ms. Hodson, I imagine that'd be Ms. McKinney Brown or her designee. Okay.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Councilmember Stewart, your question is exactly the right question to ask. The idea of putting sustainability standards on the code as adopted actually changed the focus of the code. Whereas before, the idea of the entertainment district was really to bring forward just the idea to the city council. The city council could review and look at, does this fit in with the intent of the neighborhood? Is this going to be a good fit for the neighborhood? Now the city council's considering actually having standards that they will review, which means that there has to be staff to go and review those standards and make sure that the entertainment district is in compliance with the pre-existing standards. So there's a lot more steps built into this, and it's a lot more complex at this stage. Because there are standards, there has to be a way of penalizing an entertainment district that doesn't comply. But that's actually very complicated because remember, within the entertainment district, let's say the entertainment district is 10 square blocks. Let's say it's a big one. Within the entertainment district, there's probably already established consumption areas that have been approved. And we can't just withdraw an entertainment district because that has impacts on the already established consumption areas. So the idea is if there is a severe violation, and I can't even begin, we're learning what this might mean, but some kind of severe violation, that there would be a show cause hearing, which means it would be actually reviewed in front of the liquor licensing hearing officer. Because remember, this is a form of liquor licensing. And the liquor licensing hearing officer could hear what the concerns were about the violation. This is how it typically works. They hear what the violation is, they hear what the concerns are of the licensee, and then they make a decision. How can we move forward to support this? And if there's absolutely no way to move forward to support it, then they may go as far as suspending a license. But the goal of all liquor licensing is actually to try to work with the business owner to bring them into compliance. So when we were going back and putting in standards in order to revoke if that came about, we were trying to follow the same pattern of other liquor licensing hearings. So that's what we've done. We followed the general pattern. There is due process. There is no automatic revocation. There can't be because there's too many other licenses hooked to it.
So are we saying then that a lack, say someone walks by and 3-bin waste removal is no longer in existence in the common consumption area, that would be a violation that would warrant a hearing similarly to a noise complaint?
Not typically. Typically, if for some reason the three waste recycle whatever those are called is not available, and for example, the waste hauler had just pulled those and put single ones in just because they were in a hurry that day. Well, typically we just call and say, hey, you need to look at this. This is a violation. If it runs on for 4, 6, or 8 weeks or something, and we can tell that there's just no effort to comply, that's when you start looking at bringing an issue in front of the Liquor Licensing Authority. And this is how it is with all of the licensing boards. You've been hearing about some of the hotel motel and the long drawn out, how can we get you into compliance? Because the goal is not to revoke. The goal really is compliance.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. I'll have more questions later. Thanks.
Ms. Jansen, and I have Ms. Strom.
Thank you. When we first started talking about this, I think this was the greatest thing I thought for freedom. I thought, oh my gosh, this is a great idea. And now it's turning into something that I feel like it's going to be an overburden to the businesses. It's going to add to consumers. There's just too much stuff in here now. And it's just kind of fallen apart for me. I really envisioned this as really helping Belmar and doing some really great things, but it's kind of turning into too much regulation. We took away a restriction and now we're adding 20 more on. And that's just how I feel about it. And I'm really sad to see this. So thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Strom?
Thank you. My questions pertain specifically to the waste reduction points noted on page 93 of the packet. Love the idea of the 3 bins. I think that's great. However, I feel like bullet point 2 and 3 take it a bit too far. With the zero waste, one question I have is what does that mean? Because if we're talking about having all of these people and all of this waste, what does zero waste mean? So if we're going to incorporate that, we need to know what that is. And I'm just not sure how we would get to actually zero waste. But also, I wasn't clear on what public outreach it was, what that means. And then as far as the annual waste diversion report with weights and volumes of waste landfilled, recycled, and composted, that sounds very administratively burdensome to me. And maybe that's something that is already incorporated with commercial waste removal. I don't know, but it sounded pretty significant and something that, to Councilor Jansen's point, it felt a little too big and administrative for me.
Okay, thank you. That's probably more of a sustainability question as far as diversion and keeping track. And potentially the model is what we do for our cider days and all of our events at Heritage Culture, but I'm not sure. Mr. Parker, do you have somebody that wants to address that or can address that?
Yes, Mr. Wachtel is here. I think he can address that.
Yeah, sure. I can weigh in a little bit. I think the intent, those are really good questions. And I'll just, we have a lot of experience trying to help community events go zero waste. And I think when you think about the common consumption area, it feels like an ongoing community event. So the idea here was to kind of pull some basics from those best practices and try to help actually make it easier for that common consumption area in the entertainment district to have success. So putting 3 bins out, what we've learned is if you put 3 bins out and you don't have really clear signage and they're not placed in the right locations and next to each other, we cause everyone to pretty much waste their money. They'll get contaminated and things won't end up composted or recycled. It'll just all end up in the landfill. So the intent there was actually to help. I think with the submit the plan enables staff to pretty quickly, there's not a huge burden, look at the layout. I mean, we've made these mistakes ourselves, right? You can't just put a recycle bin by itself or it's going to have trash in it, So it would enable us just to really help say, yep, this makes sense, or hey, you're making some really obvious errors here that are probably going to make it so that this isn't going to work, and we can help you. And then the signage is also a really big piece of that. We all know how frustrating. I mean, you can stump me in a second with what goes in the recycling bin, like even with all the years. So I think it's just about trying to create some common communication on what goes into those bins. And the public outreach can be as simple as, hey, these are the 2 or 3 really big events a year, and to put a person, a staff person or some volunteers out there to educate when there's that many people in the space is a really easy way to just help with the reduction of contamination. So it is a trade-off in terms of the burden, but I think that was intended to be supportive. So in terms of how you want to consider that. And then you alluded to it with the reporting. Most of the large haulers that you would contract with for all 3 of these services, they're providing that data. With the city contracts, we get a report every month. It just gives us a readout, says, here's the weight of the trash cans we hauled, here's the recycling weight, and here's the organics weight. And it's all in a nice, pretty report. So it's not a huge burden typically to get those. And I think back to the compliance discussion, it's just a way to, without having to be heavy-handed, to say like, oh, they didn't give us any data at all. I don't think we need to be really heavy-handed, but it will also say like, wow, they didn't really compost much, they didn't really recycle much, they might be having contamination issues. And usually on those reports, they'll also kind of flag that. So then we could go back and say, hey, do you want some more help next season with that? So that's the background.
So when we're looking at those reports, then does zero waste actually mean nothing goes to the dump? Or is there a different meaning behind that?
I mean, for some, it's a value statement, right? Like we're trying to get to a place where we're diverting as much waste as possible. When we report on our zero waste event efforts, when we do it through the city at Earth Day, just a couple weekends ago, we're to be considered zero waste in kind of the industry eyes, you have to be over 90% diversion. And so it doesn't mean they're going to get to zero waste, but to build the infrastructure and the concept there, it's a target, right? It's a goal. It's an intent. And it's also a nice way to describe the fact that like you're providing the correct waste streams. We know that the only way to actually get to 90% from our own experience is to be pretty heavy-handed with the materials coming in and out. And you can imagine if you have a platter of food and you have a compostable plate and plastic silverware and a plastic Coke bottle, soda bottle and a ketchup packet, you have to go to that waste station and figure out that the plate and the food goes in the compost, that the plastic forks and knives probably don't go anywhere except trash. The packet goes in the trash and the bottle can go in the recycling. And that's a lot of, we're asking a lot of people. But at that same time, if the utensils are compostable, if the condiment is in a compostable ramekin instead of individual packet, and then you have a soda bottle, now you've got a whole bunch that goes into compost and one thing that goes in recycling, and there's no brain damage done. It's pretty simple. So ultimately that's what you would need to get to. Now that would be really heavy hand, that's where you can make, I think there's recommendations that the to-go-ware at these, at establishments within the area would be suggested. And that's also back to the plan, right? Like that would enable us to say, hey, if you really want to make this work, here's the type of products you should be using so that the food being served in the plaza is really easy for people to manage. Like make it so that it's just not a huge challenge. So that's the idea behind helping them with a plan, because it's not incredibly difficult to do it if you just, make a few adjustments early on. And I think as far as the materials and packaging go too, there's going to be some state requirements that'll help move things that way anyway, which then makes it easier to have that requirements. Hope that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
Ms. Mayat Guerrero, then Ms. Springsteen, Ms. Franks, Ms. Stewart.
Yeah, I'm wondering if somebody can just walk me through sort of the basics of how the edited ordinance, the application, and then the sustainability kind of addendum actually fit together in terms of the ease of a person navigating the system. How is this actually being implemented? Are they separate so that the sustainability initiatives are easy to edit? Why aren't those just referenced in the ordinance in a more direct way? I feel like I'm reading the red line And the red line does have a lot in terms of that like process that we were just talking about, but it doesn't like have these specifics in it. And then the application sort of says, oh, you know, like refer to that component of it. So if somebody could like explain how all these pieces like fit together, I feel like I'm having a hard time navigating like what's this process, what's enforceable, what's flexible, and what's editable. Like I don't totally understand how they all fit together.
Mayor, I think Allison McKinney-Brown, our city attorney, would be the best to answer this question.
Yes. So again, the idea of putting, and I'm looking down because I'm reading the ordinance as I'm speaking. The idea of putting standards into specific standards into the entertainment district review modified the concept. And so this is what you as a body are looking at tonight. Do you want to modify the entertainment district from how it currently exists to a new format, which would have these standards attached? So if you look at 539030, we went back and built that out so that it actually says, just a second, I'm skimming down, that there needs to be a nuisance control plan. There needs to be a sustainability and waste disposal plan in conformance with standards adopted from time to time by city council resolution. So the idea is initially, right today, if someone wanted to apply for an entertainment district today, those wonderful sustainability standards that we heard about in that first half of this meeting haven't been adopted. So those things are not already in place. And what we were looking at is what types of sustainability standards could be implemented immediately so people could start applying for entertainment district licenses now. And the sustainability team came up with the set that Mr. Wachtel just reviewed. So the idea there is if this is something you want to pursue, and if you like those standards, you would adopt those standards separately by resolution. Then when an entertainment district applicant came before the city council, part of their packet, part of their application would be how many of those standards they had met and what their sustainability plan would be. And then the city council could review, did it meet the city council's desires or goals for that particular large property or that small property or that whatever the property can be. Because as you all know, at this point, we don't know what the standard is going to be. We don't know if there's going to be some entertainment districts that are one block long and some that are 10 blocks, which are two very different kinds of properties. So the idea was the sustainability standards would be adopted just from time to time by the city council as the city council's views about sustainability changed over time, as sustainability plans are implemented, as things become more generally understood and the ease of adopting that improves, those standards could be reviewed and modified. So that's what that is that sustainability standard is a separate resolution that the city council would apply as part of the licensing review.
Thank you. That was immensely helpful. So I then wonder, right, within the sustainability standards, there's like, I feel like I share some sentiment with Councilwoman Strom, which is really just about like some of this feels incredibly specific and then some of it feels sort of vague. Like some of these say shall encourage, are encouraged to, and then there's like really kind of a lot of detail about what bicycle parking is or isn't. And like, surely it's not Lakewood City's responsibility to know that bicycle parking has to work like bicycle parking? So I just we had like problems with that. Is there a reason that we have to say that you have to be able to unlock your own bicycle from the bicycle lot? Like, do you know what I'm saying? Like, it's kind of this like textual question of like, should we rather than having these really specific like bullet points that are like kind of like, well, this is what a bike rack is. Shouldn't we have like, you should require to have a plan, given that we know that these will all be really different places that include, wanting to increase waste diversion with these three, with recycling, compost, and et cetera, and like wanting to encourage bicycle use. I also noticed that like electric vehicle parking is not included on this list of possible transportation mitigations. Like walkability, bicycle connectivity isn't really connected, right? It's like have a map, but like don't do this other thing. Given that we think that these districts might be so different, and also really, I think to Councilwoman Jansen's point of like, we want them to be able to help, and build this vision. We just also need there to be clear sort of bottom of like, you can't not be thinking about sustainability. You have to be doing some of it. So like instead saying, okay, within waste reduction, you have to have a minimum, you have to have compost, recycling, et cetera, and there has to be signage. But like we want to see a plan that encourages getting towards, the zero waste goals. Or with bicycle parking, you need to have a minimum amount of this bicycle parking because we know that that's a best practice. We'd love to see your bicycle plan and how it integrates multimodal accessibility, your parking lots, and sidewalks or whatever, right? Like having some of those kinds of like descriptions of like what we're really looking for so that each one can be really specific to that location and driven by that local context.
I think in answer to your question is Mr. Wachtel, our sustainability czar, was trying to get some idea based on those of us who attended that last meeting of what City Council might be looking for. And so some of these standards are things that are pretty commonly encouraged for things we're already doing. And some of these things like zero waste, there's no way someone can apply for an entertainment district license this week and implement zero waste before they get a license, an entertainment district. That's just not possible. But 3 years from now, it may very well be a requirement to move forward with entertainment districts, or it may very well be mandated for all common consumption areas. So some of these things that just could not happen this summer for anyone who applied this summer, it really puts them on notice that these are the things the city council's looking at over time implementing. And as you're moving forward with entertainment districts or common consumption areas, be ready for over time. We are going to be looking towards zero waste. We are going to be looking toward requiring that there be places to charge your bicycles or charge your electric vehicles. So some of these are putting on notice of longer term plans, 3 to 5 years. And some of them are things that people really could do if they applied for a license this summer. And that's how I believe we were looking at it. That's my very best overview of it, but I am stepping very much into Jonathan Wachtel's territory. So I'm going to let him step in and make sure that I have not misspoken.
Thank you. I think you captured it. I mean, I didn't attend that meeting, and I think I was asked, what sustainability measures might fit in an entertainment district, and provided a list of what those look like. And I'm not sure, the shalls versus the shoulds, how that all ended up getting translated very specifically. But I think these are all for consideration. And I would say that I think part of the challenge is zero waste is not easy to do without taking several steps. I really think it'd be a lot of show. I'll just be frank. It would be a lot of showing that we care without measurable results to simply require 3 bins, be put in a plaza. It's not as simple as that. I really think we would have contamination, and we would have required something that looked good, but might ultimately look really poorly when there's all kinds of stuff in the wrong bin. So I think that's its own issue. I think when it comes to the transportation, the lens that I was thinking through here is that we have bicycle parking standards when there's new development. We have electric vehicle parking standards for new development. What we're talking about here is converting public space to a shared use of some sort, and we need to figure out, where the deficiencies are in that infrastructure potentially to be able to provide that multimodal transportation. And if you're thinking about a large congregation of people, certainly what came to my mind is it's outdoors, which means the largest groupings will probably take place in nice weather, in which case, access by bicycle should be definitely made to be a strong opportunity. You need good parking, and you need to accommodate for what bicycling looks like now, which is a lot of e-bikes, a lot of cargo bikes, a lot of different types of things. And so those are just standards pulled from the most bike-friendly communities and best practices in terms of how you ask for bike parking to be provided, so that it's not as simple as, buying a rack and one rack and putting it in a corner and saying, oh, we provided bike parking. It needed to be a little bit more thought out. I certainly think that to the discussion of, we don't know how different these are all going to be, that writing something to make it more contextual makes a lot of sense. I mean, that's what we just talked about for Article 13, right? The whole thing is written to be context sensitive. So if there's a way to do that and make it better, we're happy to come back to that. I don't think I had full understanding or context, but that would make a lot of sense. But I think these are the basic concepts that would be that came to mind when I thought about retrofitting a public space for congregation of people having a good time, outside. So hope that helps.
Yeah, that's incredibly helpful. I think it's like sort of like, can we provide sort of the floor, right? And then like the variables that we need them to be thinking about to include in their plan. Because I do recognize that these are very good best practices, and some of them, like I said, with the 3 bins is maybe a bad example, because to your point, you must also have like very clear illustration, really good like communication on it, or it's not going to do anything. So something like that, where you maybe have one whole category that's like, it's like your application has to have your sustainability plan and must include these categories. You've got waste reduction with like a minimum of like these things. Here's additional things to consider. You've got transportation support, minimum of these things. Here's additional things you could consider. Bike parking, minimum of this much bike parking, or like these types of locations, or what have you, these types of bicycles that could be locked to it. You could think about these other things. We are also interested in, what your energy consumption is, what your EV parking is, if you're near public transit, and if you are in well-connected bike lanes or sidewalks. We'd love that to be included in the plan. And then that way you're getting a plan that's like, they're thinking it through. There are bare minimums, or not bare minimums, but minimums that are like going to really suit these needs, but allows for, if it's 1 block versus 10 blocks versus like, Belmar already has quite a lot of these things, versus if 40 West went for it, they might have to build more of it, that there would kind of be that context shift. To me, I think that, and I would be curious what others think. For me, I think that might work better given the bizarre experiment that we're about to do with entertainment districts. But I don't know what others were envisioning when we had this conversation a couple of weeks ago.
And Ms. Springsteen, Ms. Franks, Ms. Stewart, then Ms. Vincent.
So as a Ward 3 counselor, one of the things I'd love to see with the entertainment district in potentially in Belmar is a First Friday art walk sort of situation. And, which would be wonderful as we're coming out of COVID and be able to be out in the open air and be without our masks and so forth. But as we all know, First Friday art districts have been so successful in so many parts of the city. One of the things I'm wondering about that is just how, so it seems like that would be a more intense situation in terms of attracting a lot more people than usual, food trucks, whatever the case may be, bands, music. I'm just wondering how we would deal with that from a sustainability point of view, having more intensity one time of the month than maybe other times.
Would you would you like me to address that, Mayor, Council?
Yeah, sure. I mean, if you
there's a variety of things you could do when it comes to, well, you brought, the increase in just traffic. I mean, I think that's part of the thinking here is like, how do you mitigate that? Because we're trying to create a public good, but with it always comes some type of externalities and unintended consequences that might make people frustrated. And so do we have, is for that question in Belmar, like, do we have the public transit infrastructure to really push that? Do we have the right bike infrastructure? And Belmar was developed before we had a lot of our bike parking standards. So just on that front, like, I do think there's a deficiency there, but I don't want to speak, I think we need to bring in our multimodal transportation coordinator. And I did run these through her. And we could get some more insight on that. But I think that's one big piece, is to think about how people are moving through and to the site. And I think some of those standards too are making sure that there's not conflicts. You're adding bicycle parking or other things, but you don't want to block up the sidewalk and the pedestrian environment. So where those are located is important. When it comes to things like food trucks, there are things we could do, in terms of the waste being produced. When we have events like, and I'll just use Earth Day as an example, and I believe for Cider Days as well, it's in those contracts when those food trucks come that they need to use all compostable materials, right? I mean, you can write into standards, if we so choose, all types of sustainability standards, not just waste, but we could have a preference for, we could ask them to have a preference for local food vendors as opposed to, and support local businesses. We could have it be about making sure there's healthy options, if there's going to be food trucks, at least there's some, and so those are different things that could be considered. Even the fuels, I mean, that's getting really nuanced, but, if you've been around a lot of food trucks, there's some that are much less pleasant to be standing around when you're waiting for your order than others based on how they're, cooking and the energy, the type that they're using. So, I mean, there's a lot of things they could do. I guess the question is, what's our temperature on that and how involved do we want to get?
Ms. Franks?
Well, I think Jonathan just picked up on a key point, is how involved do we want to get? I want to kind of circle back to what Councillor Jansen was saying. Certainly, it started out as one thing and it's sort of, moving along a line to the other. And that doesn't mean that's not the right direction to go. But I think that there's also, for these entertainment districts, they're going to be trying to satisfy the consumer demand. And the consumer is moving in a direction of demanding, healthier choices and that. So I don't know where government sits on some of that. I think that some of that, for me, will be those businesses making decisions based on consumers. I've seen some ideas that other communities have tried, in which maybe they've, started out with what I think Councillor Mayat Guerrero was saying, was sort of, where is sort of a minimum? Where are we at for things that would be those required elements? And then is there some type of a way in which we can grow it in a way, the program in a way that's meaningful with data points? And I know that there's companies out there like Mentimeter, which is one where you could have a way for people who are attending in that consumption area, that common area, to indicate, things that made it a pleasurable experience for them, things that made it less, pleasurable. And if those entertainment districts would be willing to host those surveys and allow the city to look at that data, to be a kind of a data participant in that, then maybe we are able to grow the program way over time. I'm just concerned about it starting out way too big, way too onerous, and we don't know what we don't know. I also want to say that I was a volunteer at one of those 3 trash can stations, and Councillor Vincent knows exactly. I spent half the day or half my shift dumpster diving, picking the things out that were in the wrong thing and moving them around and explaining wax coated versus not wax coated. And then you've got the whole supply chain issue where there are some times where the vendor would have wanted to have gotten the product, like a compostable fork and a spoon, but the supply chain didn't support that. And so again, we run into these, it's much more complex in practice. And again, just educating people. And then you have different food vendors, one who may be able to do a paper wrapper on theirs, which is more simple, but somebody else that may have a product that requires quite a bit more containment. And it becomes very confusing for the consumer. But we also did have a good time. I think Councillor Vincent will share. There were people who learned a lot about the number coding system and all that. So I'm actually leaning more towards sort of a baseline, the minimums, and then using data points over time to grow something out rather than starting with something that is far too burdensome and moves us far away from the objective of really trying to support our businesses to gain back a business that maybe was not prevalent due to COVID. So again, those are just some of my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll go to Ms. Vincent, and then I'll start our second round with Ms. Stewart.
Yes, thank you. I think that Ms. Franks said almost exactly what I was going to say, because I was heavily involved with her too when we were at the Festival Italiano, and it is burdensome for businesses. And I have to kind of agree with Councillor Jansen. We had something that at its core was very good. And I think maybe the intent was admirable, but the impact, I, for one, just would think it was too burdensome and takes too much. So I, for one, is the kind of the KISS principle. Let's just keep it as simple as we can and move on. We've got to help these businesses. And I know from what I understand from Councillor Stewart, they are kind of chomping at the bit to get this started and really want to implement it. So that's where I stand. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Shahrazadi.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. So I want to reinforce the point that Councilwoman Maya Guerrero and then Councillor Franks just made of I would be in favor, and I know we're in an effort to get to consensus, but creating some sort of minimum, some sort of floor that we could be working off of. And I would just ask us all to reflect on the conversation we just had about the EDM menu. We're talking about how we're running out of time and options, and we need to be proactive. And so I understand that there is a desire to keep this simple. I think you missed the last S in that, Councilwoman Vincent, but we understood what you were talking about. So I do want to be mindful of not creating burdens for our business owners, but we are building something and we are in a climate crisis. And so if it means that we have to take a little bit more time to think about this in a way that's meaningful and allows for us to be considerate of the overall impact to the community and the environment, I'm willing to take that opportunity to really reflect on that. And I think that we discussed in the last round of this how we have a workaround for Belmar. We know our friends at Belmar are eager to get this going. I understand that there are First Fridays that already exist in Belmar, so there have been opportunities where they've been able to navigate that already. And so I would just reinforce my commitment to finding a solution that sort of meets us somewhere in the middle here.
Okay, so just real quick on a check-in. Certainly understand the simplicity, and this is new, right? And where it's different than our development menu is we're talking about hundreds, if not thousands of projects. Whereas this, we're talking about potentially one and maybe two or three down the road. We don't know right now. So Ms. McKinney-Brown, I guess my question would be, could you pull this out and simply have a resolution that states we want a sustainability plan around these three items and leave it pretty loose? So maybe it's transportation, bike infrastructure, recycling, and waste diversion. And that leaves it up to them to get creative, come up with a plan. They could reach out to our sustainability folks if they need help to better understand. And then it's really their ability to try to pick what's important to them and what's going to make the most sense. Can it be something that's that loose?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we can do that pretty quickly. I need a little bit of time to think about if that's something that we can just put into the application to put people on notice, or if we'd want to go back and build that immediately into the code. I do think, just to put all of you on notice, we are going to have to amend that entertainment district code. I think we need, I think at the end of 1 year, I'm going to have a whole lot better idea of what this is going to require from us as a community. And I expect that we're going to bring it back. And at that point, you as a council are going to have a better idea of how to build that sustainability in there. And we're going to have a better idea in how to enforce that without impacting the other licensing rights. So for now, if as a council, you would like to go with something relatively loose that really puts the burden on the applicant, I think we can do that and do that quickly and try to meet the needs and desires of this council.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Stewart.
Okay. Well, so I understand and totally agree with the fact that we need simplicity in this, and balancing that with the fact that we as a city are building something, and we want to be mindful of the impacts that these could potentially have environmentally, and building something that we can be proud of as a community that really moves us forward. I do, my read is that potentially what we got tonight is a bit overly specific and overly aspirational, and really not realistically implementable immediately with what we're trying to do here, and could potentially create some undue burden. I do like the idea of asking what their plans are when it comes to kind of maybe 3 pillars of sustainability that are outlined. I think that's positive. I do wonder if we need to have people have been talking about a floor. What is a floor though? Because the other thing that I remember from our discussion a few weeks ago is that we wanted this to be flexible based on the needs of the communities that the entertainment districts were part of. So my concern is that this is just going to get really convoluted in our attempt to do something really good. So I have concerns about that. I wonder if just a simple, we want to see your alternative transportation plan. You must have one of these 3 things to start off with: bicycle parking, EV charging, or, pedestrian connectivity from the neighborhood that you're surrounding, or, and just a floor that we're working off of that is similar to the enhanced development menu, where we're allowing some flexibility within what we're asking for because it meets the needs of the community. I guess that's kind of what I envision. I don't want this to be overly burdensome administratively or on the businesses who are trying to do this, but I also realize that we are building something and trying to do something good for our community. And I just, quite frankly, am a little bit concerned that we're getting in the way of ourselves right now. I apologize, that didn't offer too many solutions, but.
Okay, Ms. Mayotte Guerrero, and then Ms. Jansen.
I mean, I agree that I don't want to make it too complicated. I think that I do think that there needs to be a floor. I don't think saying that there is a transportation plan, a waste diversion plan, and maybe like one other part of it plan is like enough. I do think that there needs to be some minimums. Like the waste diversion plan must include composting and recycling and like posting or communication on those things. I would say like a transportation plan must include bicycle parking. I mean, I can't imagine there's not a single storefront that I don't think should have at least a one bike rack. Right. So like those kinds of basics, but like, and then some guidance of like, consider these other types of variables just so that they know what we're actually looking for. Cause I think if you give no parameters of like, tell us what you're going to do about transportation and you're like a shop owner, like what are you supposed to talk about? You know, like what are you supposed to research or think about? You don't know. And so I would say like, for me, having like multimodal electric vehicle and waste diversion as like key considerations. And then I would really defer, I think, to Mr. Wachtel's, I'm sorry, I think you said your name wrong, expertise on like what those sort of minimums should be, right? And then having just a little bit of parameter of like, okay, and then that's the kind of thing that you will submit in this without it being extra rigorous. I do think that if we don't allow for some sort of basic sort of parameter or basic floor, that actually will be harder, because I don't know that business owners will just naturally know what we're intending when we like say these things. So I think there would be that. And I also think, you know, to Councilwoman Sherazai's point, like climate change is super urgent. So we want to make sure that it's not possible to do nothing, no matter how much staff might change or council might change over the next many years of entertainment district evolution. So I think for me, having those parameters and having the floor would be an important component, but definitely agree otherwise with Mayor Paul's kind of next steps.
Okay, Ms. Jansen, and I want to kind of do a check-in and see if we can get some sort of direction.
Sure, thanks. So I love the carrot idea, you know, and I think you guys need to think that we're all adults, and actually a lot of the kids, I was just at a high school this morning and they're really into recycling and they really know what to do. And I do too, you know, I mean, sometimes I'm like, what is this? But you're right. It is, what is this? Where does it go? I think the trash is probably the biggest issue with the entertainment district. And I think just educating, you know, this is what we want to do to minimize our impact and see if they will go along with it. And I was just wondering, did you guys, how about the fee? Was the fee ever, is that staying the same as it was before? Was it 500?
I don't think that's changed. I don't have it up, Ms. McKinney-Brown.
No, we made no changes to that resolution whatsoever.
So the fee is the same. It's 500, and I think it was like 250 for a renewal.
Yes.
So what if like we made the renewal less if they start with the trash, the waste, zero waste program? You know, wouldn't that be something that could, you know, start something small, you know, and then working into something else?
Absolutely. If that's the direction that we get from council, that is something we absolutely can do.
So again, that's a little bit more of the carrot idea.
You know, and then reduce that renewal, say, hey, I'm going to put up trash bins in front of mine, and that will reduce my renewal by what, 50, 60, I don't know, whatever, $100. If they want to continue on with the entertainment district. That's my idea.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we have a concept before us that's rarely been done in Colorado. And we're certainly top down trying to tell the businesses how to do it or what to do, right? So if you don't have this infrastructure, you need to put it in. And is there a way that we're missing where we can work together with them and we can learn from them as to what worked and what didn't work? And that way, again, we're not so prescriptive, but they certainly know our goals and our metrics, but there's an opportunity for us to learn from them. We don't know if this is even going to be a success, right? And we don't know where they're going to be. So we're kind of shooting, in the sky as to these different things. Certainly we understand these areas that we want to see, but to Ms. Maya Guerrero's point, I get that, but there may not be an ability to have an EV charging station at this point. But 5 years from now, when lots of people are going and there's money coming in, or, these other opportunities, then we could maybe move towards that. And so I think we're kind of high centered, and I don't have a clear consensus as to if folks want to go forward with these standards or not. I'm getting mixed from a lot of folks, and I hear there's validity to it, but maybe not so prescriptive. But then some folks are saying we do want it a little bit more prescriptive, at least with a floor. And let's just face it, I mean, it's May already, and we have folks that are lined up to potentially have a summer series in place with something like this. Ms. Franks, maybe you can help.
Well, I don't know about that, but I just want to bring back to the point. I do think that consumers are starting to demand more. And I do think that our businesses are certainly, at least the ones I've been talking to, are very tuned in that people want, compostable items that they feel like they can, when they're using a single use item. But I definitely am leading into something less prescriptive. I certainly want there to be a floor. I think that we have to establish some type of a minimum, but I'm just concerned with the supply chain issues and maybe not being able to source the kinds of products that they want. So I'm leaning more into a partnership. I want to go back to that data sharing. The first entertainment district, I think there's a way for them to elicit from the people that attend and utilize that common area to understand what's good, what's not good, what they'd like to see. And I think that those data points, if they're willing to share them, if they're willing to do it and share it, it's a great way for us to learn. I just don't feel equipped to try to support a business on one front and then have such prescriptive things on the other front that it actually harms their ability to be successful. And then we say, well, the entertainment district wasn't successful when I'm not a business owner and don't provide those types of services. So I'm more for sort of rolling out something where the expectations are well set, that we're as a community, we value sustainability. We're moving towards it in every area that we can. They need to know that we will be bringing more and more things to bear that will improve the experience for our community and also for our environment. But to start out too heavy-handed, I just think is setting up a potential first district for to not be successful. So I'm more for light touch and more for learning as we go, but yet putting the businesses on notice through whatever the city attorney's office can do to make sure they're aware that we will be ratcheting up those requirements as infrastructure and other types of things come to bear that allow us to more easily do that.
Thank you. Mr. Abel?
I think a lot of good points have been made. If we over-engineer this thing, it'll never fly. I think we need to take a less restrictive approach. And, everywhere I go, folks are recycling. Folks know what bins to put where or what stuff to put in what bins. There's a lot more awareness out there than there was even 3 years ago. So I'd say let's give it a shot. And if we need more restriction, let's add more restriction. But, let's not let too much get in the way of the fun that these entertainment districts are intended to provide.
Thank you. Ms. McKim-Brown, can I ask a process question? And then Ms. Hodson, I have a question as to how we could potentially move forward. So as it stands now, we have a red line with this is all kind of mixed in to the application. Would it be possible to have, I think you did say this earlier, we could take that out of this red line and go forward with our application minus these recommendations. Okay, so that's something that we could do. And then Ms. Hodson, would your team, the sustainability team, be able to gather maybe 4 things that could give a floor? So basically we're developing a menu, and I know this isn't great because we're doing legislation somewhat on the fly, but I'm certainly hearing that people want it less restrictive, and maybe by decoupling it, we could get it to the point where there is a resolution that could be ready when this is ready to be passed, that could have 4 areas kind of built off of our menu that we have that set a baseline and have some encouragements so that we can get this thing moving forward and so folks can engage.
So Mayor, of course we can do that. Are we saying those are to the point of the lighter touch, begin with a lighter touch? Does that mean these are recommendations that the city would like to see in terms of those practices? So they're not tied to regulations with consequences, et cetera, at least for this first year. Is that how we're going to build this? And by the way,
I'm seeing a lot of yeses, but I'll have to double check. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say a little side note. This has been a real learning experience for us. On April 11th, I wish we would have spent more time kind of developing this concept, because we did spend a lot of staff time, and I guess made some assumptions that that's what that's what City Council wanted to see come forward. So had we spent more time really developing what those thoughts were, I think it would have saved a lot of this kind of sausage making. But maybe that's good too, to have this conversation so people can really vet this out and decide what is the best for the community. So I'm just going to argue with myself for a minute.
No, I think that's fair. I think we're learning. And again, this is brand new. And, there's some great ideas. And I think the intention is to do some great things. It's just how do we get there? And again, how do we become a partner with the folks that want to do this also? Ms. Maya Guerrero.
I just want to reiterate, I think lots of us are saying things that are very close to each other, but I will just, for clarification of my own position, say that I do think that can be a looser menu, that it can be more flexible, and that we can partner with folks over time to make it the best possible program. I will also say, if there is not specific legally required process on sustainability that has a floor and then some level of parameter, then I will not be in favor of whatever comes out. So I just want to be extremely explicit about where I'm at, since I think we are all talking within a few inches of gray from each other, that is where I am at.
So I think that's a good platform to jump to. Is there consensus? Do folks want this legally binding to begin with, or want it, carrot or stick, basically? So what's the consensus on that? Do people want it legally, or do they want to start with the softer approach and the list of saying, we want this to go forward? So legally, shake your heads. I got to get some consensus. Okay, I'm not seeing legally as a consensus, but forever hold your peace. Ms. Sherazai.
Before I shake my head one way or another, I want to make sure I understand what you're saying. I do want this to be looser, but I do think that we have to sort of be explicit in a couple of different ways. So by saying legally, we're saying that there is some explicitness to what we're requesting. However, there is a little bit of loosening on what that can include.
Correct. Legally, we would have to codify that in this as we have with the red lines as part of the application. And the potential other piece would be pulling that out and then having it as a separate resolution with a list of recommendations or best practices to move forward.
Might we say legally means these are requirements. These will be requirements of the entertainment district. That's what we mean. I think that's what we mean by
yes,
legally.
That's what we would need. And I'm not sure we get that hashed out tonight, potentially, if folks felt comfortable trying to legally figure out what all those would be. Mr. Abel?
Thank you, Mayor. One of the things I like best about our discussion on this previously was Ms. McKinney Brown's idea that it needs to be flexible. We don't know, we haven't used this yet. We're not there. So I agree, the flexibility needs to be there so we can adapt it to the best needs of our community. And I don't think getting bogged down in regulation is where we need to be with it right now.
Thank you, Ms. Maya Guerrero.
So I totally agree with that sentiment. So to be really clear, I think when we're using pronouns like it or this would be legally required, I don't know what you're referring to. So I want to be, again, like when I'm saying that there needs to be some level of legal requirement of sustainability within the process that is legally required to happen, that's what I'm saying. I am not saying that it is this level of specific or rigorous. Like I would want it to be different with a specific floor, and then also to require like the sustainability proposal within the application process as it is currently written. But that like the actual of like what does that have to be? Let's make sure that it's flexible. Let's make sure that it's context dependent. Let's make sure that it allows for us to evolve and change as the program changes. Like, yeah, so those ideas of like the categories, maybe some best practices, some floors of what's there, all of those things. But again, for me, the thing is not like, I don't feel clear about what that needs to be. But for me, like if it's just a suggestion of like, we have really nice goals and you all have really nice goals, and it's not a part of the actual process that must happen, that for me is the issue.
Okay, so we're just maybe I'm just out of it tonight, but I think we just went full circle then, because that's where we started tonight with the prescriptive nature of what is in the red line from the sustainability department. And so my understanding was folks didn't want to see that. Ms. Jansen, Ms. Stewart, then Ms. Franks.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Mayor. That's how I thought we were going. We were gonna keep it simple with the businesses so that, hey, we'd like to see some sustainability, and I think they would do it, but I don't want to punish them. I don't want to punish anybody for putting a ketchup packet in the wrong bin. You know, I don't think that's what we need to be doing. People want to have fun. They want to go out and enjoy themselves. And if they have to worry about all this stuff and worry about, oh my gosh, if I didn't do this right, I'm going to get in trouble. And that's not what we should be doing. It should be something. This should be a good thing for the city, and we should be working. But I do understand the sustainability, and I want to do that, but I don't want to have it where we have to horsewhip people. You know, it doesn't make any sense to me. We need to let them have their business and get their customers to come back, and that's what they want to do. That's all I've got.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Stewart.
That was not my understanding of what Councilwoman Maya Guerrero just said. My understanding is that we want to make the requirements utterly flexible and working with the organizations who are applying for the districts, but that it is codified somewhere that we do want sustainability to be part of the application, and that we want a plan laid forward. And that was my understanding of what is actually being asked for. So my understanding is that when you look on page 5 of the red line version of the ordinance that we have, 5.39040, a J, I believe, under what the application requirements are. My understanding is that that red line on J that says a sustainability and waste disposal plan is a requirement of the application. So that is codified legally in our ordinance. We want you to have a plan, and that is the legal piece. So again, there are no specifics under that. Okay, I'm getting ahead on. There are no specifics under that. It just says we want you to have in your application a sustainability and waste disposal plan. And then what that can be, we are allowing to be utterly flexible right now because we're learning as we go. We just want to codify the fact that this is something we will be asking and requiring of every applicant. That is my understanding of what is being asked for. And that, to me, is a really nice compromise as well of codifying that this is important. We are going to ask for this. What specifics we are asking for, we are not going to lay out. We're going to be very flexible in that right now because we're all learning. But just that J on page 5, that we may just want to keep that in there in the red line ordinance. That's my understanding of what's being asked for. So I would be supportive of that.
Well, just to clarify, Ms. Stewart, I appreciate that, but that's kind of what I said a little while ago. I said, let's pick out like 4 pillars and be specific on that and then go forward. But my understanding was that was too prescriptive for people. So I don't know.
I apologize. My understanding was that I see what you're saying. I do see what you're saying. That perhaps strikes a nice balance of putting that in the ordinance, that's what we're asking for. And then the sustainability must include these 4 pieces that you were talking about. That feels like a nice, easy compromise. And we're getting head nods on all of that. So I would be supportive of that.
So we would have, again, a little bit more, you have to have a waste diversion plan. You have to have bicycle parking. I mean, that's what we were trying to say, but it's really loosely up to them. But okay, Ms. Franks, please.
I think we're just tired and we're speaking past each other. I think we are all, and I'm going to look for head nods here. One, we all want that increased flexibility. We want consumer demand. We want all of those things. We want our businesses to be able to be successful. I think where we're at is we're just simply wanting to set the framework now for those codified requirements. So there wouldn't be the detail of that, but it just puts the businesses on notice that waste diversion matters, but they're not going to have targets to hit. They're not going to have to, there's just going to be certain things where we're going to want to, over time, we're going to want to build those things out. So to begin with, you need to at least tell us what your plan is. And your plan could be you're simply going to have 3 trash cans, that are marked correctly, and you'll monitor your waste diversion at the waste company, and you'll be able to increase that. So I think we're all wanting to make sure. I think that my thing is making sure the businesses know that long term there's going to be more and more things that come about that we may want to help with sustainability on. But I think we're all aligned that we want that really just basic flexibility, but we want them to be put on notice from day one when they apply that there are things we care about. We care about walkability. How do people get there? We care about people being able to charge when they get there, but there's not going to be any requirements on them at this point other than telling us what they plan to do. And it could be, we don't need X because we're on a transportation line, or we don't need Y because we're far enough out where people aren't going to be biking to our area if we get an entertainment district somewhere else. So I think we're just talking past each other. I think we all want that flexibility, businesses to be successful, and the framework to be built in to begin with. That way there's no surprises for the entertainment district later.
I got it. Thank you. I appreciate that. I do. And I'm just trying to figure out, as someone would say, to land this plane. With that said, because we're all getting a lot of head nods, and I don't know if what you just said is, 1, agreeable to everybody, and 2, how's that put into a resolution that can then move forward, right? So Ms. Hodson, would it be all right if I dialogued a little bit with Mr. Wachtel on this?
Sure.
Okay, just the understanding of, if we put in a resolution, the base would be a waste diversion plan. Is that submit a waste diversion plan.
I think we can.
So hold on, Miss May. Okay, so Miss May Aguilera, go ahead.
Well, saying just a waste diversion plan to me is really not what I just heard. I was hearing we keep J where the application requires a sustainability and waste diversion plan. And then we have sort of the specific things that we want to see included in that plan, like waste diversion, transportation, like multimodal or whatever, right? Those like pillars. And like, again, I defer to Mr. Wachtel about that, about what those pillars are, but that would be the thing, right? So it's not like, here's how you have to do multimodal stuff. Here's how you have to do waste diversion. It's like, you have to have a sustainability plan. These are like the core aspects that we want to make sure you include. And that is like, that's what's legally required, which is different than just a waste diversion plan.
So I was starting with the waste diversion as one piece though.
Got it.
And then a transportation plan. And then what other plans we think would be, something we'd want to see in an entertainment district. So,
Mayor, can I offer? It seems like we are going around and around. So how about this as a thought? So how about the messaging being a part of the application as instead of in the code itself? So as a part of the application, it says the city strongly is encouraging, and then we talk about those three elements or whatever those are, waste diversion, the multimodal, and I'm also forgetting the third one, but we put those down saying the city is strongly encouraging and supports the tenets of good sustainable practices. And then after the first year, maybe we go through some surveying and ask the tenants to do some surveying and find out, what the participants, what the attendees want to see, and what works and what doesn't. So then we come back in a year, and if you really want to fortify, we can add this then to a modification in the code in a year from now. So we're kind of doing it both ways. So this, for the first year, we're messaging, and the city wants to see good practices and on these three kind of areas. And then in a year, it's a part of the code. So all of the people, the business community that's a part of the entertainment districts, if they've applied for one and received those permissions, they know that it's coming. So there aren't surprises, and we'll better be able to kind of fine tune what the regulations are and what makes the most sense. What do you think of that as an offer? Does anybody like that?
Well, I think some, and I appreciate that. I think some do, but I'm not getting a consensus that we're in two camps, right? That kind of less restrictive, like you just said, Mr. Abel just said 3 camps, or something that kind of lays that benchmark saying, well, you do need to do a sustainability plan, and that plan must incorporate these 3 areas or these 4 areas. Ms. Vincent?
I guess I don't know where we're at now. I thought about 45 minutes ago, we had agreed to put this as part of the application and that we would come back with some data, that we support sustainability. And there's nothing that says we can't come back later and assess this. I get very nervous about being too prescriptive on something we don't even know what we don't know yet. So I thought that's where we were 45 minutes ago. And then all of a sudden we're coming back to, we need to put something in the code. I, for one, don't think, I'm not in that camp at all. I'm for, let's educate, let's get some data, then let's come back and see where we're at. So that's where I'm in that camp, I guess.
But it's a confusing camp you're in. Only because No, if we keep this all in there, it's prescriptive. So you want to keep all the red lines in the application. Okay, you don't want to keep all the red lines in the application.
What I want is what I thought I heard Ms. Hodson say, and what I thought I heard other people say, is that in the application, we just put some verbiage in there about how sustainability is important. We're going to be looking at things. Please start thinking about this, however that goes, with Mr. Wachtel's information perhaps on there. These are some of the things you may want to look at, but I don't think that they have to commit to that, to doing those things yet. Does that help?
So, Ms. Franks.
I definitely, Ms. Hodgson, thank you for kind of pointing out that clearer path. I do think that I can be very supportive of the fact that we're notifying our businesses, that we're getting that out there. That's my biggest concern. I don't want them to have surprises down the line. So I think that making sure that we have a rigorous education process of the pillars that are important to the city council is important. As long as that is documented, it doesn't have to be codified for me inside the resolution or the ordinance, whichever way it has to go. Again, sorry, I'm getting a little tired here. We're going around the circle. I can be absolutely supportive of what Ms. Hodgson said and what Councilor Vincent just said, can be in supportive of that. Just the businesses are on notice and that we will be coming back with those, strengthening those pillars, but we should be telling them what the pillars are to begin with. Again, I don't want them to be surprised about what those things are that are important to us. And I can certainly, like I said, get on board with Ms. Hodgson and Ms. Vincent and hopefully others.
Okay, building off of Ms. Hodgson, what if we did, so we probably have a best practices that we utilize for cider days for all of our events. There's waste diversion, we have bicycle parking, we have all these different things. So what if we simply said, for the next year, we strongly encourage sustainability. These are the practices that the city of Lakewood puts in place. And we want you to take a look and utilize these and come back and get your feedback and know that we'll be moving towards these as requirements after the first year. Some sort of list of requirements, and maybe that list of requirements we glean off of our menu that we're going to adopt eventually that we discussed earlier tonight. So maybe that becomes more, something more prescriptive where you have to, have this many points. We learn off of this year by teaching these were our best practices for our events at the city of Lakewood with waste diversion, with alternative transportation, with, these different areas. Ms. Magaro.
Just have a point of clarification. So in that scenario, does that mean that we do not ask them to include any sustainability plan or information in their application?
So I'm getting yeses, but it could also be they could create their own, but it doesn't mean that we're going to say yes or we're not going to give them that baseline. We're going to say, this is what we do. We'd like to encourage you to do it. And we'd like to hear from you what you think your plan is going to be.
Yeah. I think for me, as long as that last piece of we need to hear what your plan is included, then I feel very amenable. Because I think we can give them our expectations so that they sort of know these goalposts might be the goalposts in the future, to Councilman Frank's point. But then, and that we need them to be thinking about sustainability. So here's how we think about it. Please let us know what are the things, include that, in the application. But yeah, it does not have to have rigorous parameters.
Yep. But simply put, being that absent that, you would not be approved. But if you submit a sustainability, if you submit that, then what I don't want to get into is staff saying, nope, that's not enough, or council saying, no, we expected more, not enough. We're saying loosely, this is what the city of Lakewood does. We strive for sustainability. We'd love to see you hit these metrics. What is your plan? Just share your plan with us, and that's part of the application. Ms. Springsteen.
I hate to be I feel like we've gone around in circles and circles and circles and come back to we're not doing anything. So why did we do this for 2 hours? I mean, there's a lot of important things we need to talk about in this city, and this doesn't make sense to me. Now we're back to let's just not do anything. So great use of our time. Thanks.
Okay, so I'm just looking and walk me through. We're gonna pull out the pieces regarding the sustainability standards. And we're gonna loosely put that into, well, actually, we're gonna put that in the application that a sustainability plan needs to be filed with the application. Is there a consensus on that? A sustainability plan needs to be filed with the application. These are the things that the city of Lakewood looks at and things that we do. And know that these may become part of the codified within a year as to things that will be prescriptive. Is that consensus on that? Okay. So Ms. Hodson, does that make sense?
Yes, I also want to ask Allison if that makes sense, because Allison will be writing this. Are we clear, Allison?
Yes, I think that I can work with Mr. Wachtel and we can come up with something. The other thing is by putting them on notice, I think it actually gives us a little bit more parameters throughout the licensing process as to common consumption areas and those, what can happen at that level, which is I think going to be a little easier level for us to work with. So I think that this really gives us the flexibility we need to do this effectively.
Okay. The other piece of that is we need to bring back the fee resolution, I guess, because that needs to be adopted. Is that correct? So that would come back with all of this. Okay. All right. It's good conversation and it's things that are important to people on this council. So I certainly appreciate everybody's opinion. And again, this is something that's brand new and could be real powerful for a lot of different areas in our community. Okay. So with that, are there any committee updates or council ward meeting announcements? Okay, seeing none. Miss Vincent.
Sorry. Yes, I will be sending out some information tomorrow to the Housing Policy Commission. You'll have 2 documents. So if there's any questions about that, please feel free to ask me. And at the same time, I will be probably throwing out some possible dates too. And that's it.
Great, thank you. Mr. Abel.
Thank you. My Ward 1 meeting will be Saturday morning, 9:30 at Holy Shepherd Church. And we'll be discussing the preservation of Bear Creek Lakes Park.
Great, thank you. Okay, Ms. Hodson.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to make a comment briefly and publicly. Today's May 2nd, and it's the last day of employment for our Public Works Director, Jay Hutchison. Jay worked for the city for 38 years. He's very well known, both internally within the organization and among people in the public works profession. He's known as a smart and capable professional, and Jay is very well thought of. His accomplishments over the years are too numerous to list, and it's too late to try, but they have shaped the city for better and for the city's future. it's important, and what's most important is that Jay is always kind. He's a great listener. He's a problem solver. And as you know, he's got great public speaking skills. He has a special way of accepting all points of view, and he corrects people without judgment. And I know that firsthand. You know what? Jay gets to start a new chapter in his life with his dear wife, his two kids, and his five grandkids. So I just wanted to publicly thank Jay for a career of service to the city of Lakewood and for his dedication. So with that, join me in just wishing him well. I just wanted to make sure that he hears, hopefully he'll listen to this, and really just publicly thank Jay for his years of service. So thank you for allowing me to do that.
That's very special. And Jay, we're giving you a standing ovation. If we were in chambers, we'd be all up on our feet. So we certainly thank you and wish you all the best.
Thanks, Mayor.
Yeah. All right. With that, we will adjourn our meeting at 10:24 p.m. And I again appreciate everybody's time, efforts, and energy.